Good evening, Texans. Get comfortable, maybe dim the lights because these stories aren't meant to be heard alone. Your state's graveyards are not as quiet as they seem, and the voices there never stop. Tonight I'll share 10 true tales from cemeteries across Texas that still whisper in the dark. But as you listen, watch out for your nearest cemetery. Sometimes the voices don't stay where they belong. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? And don't make the mistake most people do by watching without subscribing, or you'll miss the next upload. And trust me, the ones ahead will haunt you even more. I took the caretaker job at Oak Hill because nights are kind to a man who wants to be overlooked. The city clerk slid a ring of keys across a laminate desk and said, "Mostly mowing, lock the gates by 10. Keep the flower vases upright if the wind kicks up." I nodded like a churchgoer and said I could do tidy. 37, newly divorced in the quiet way, living in a duplex that smelled faintly of other men's dinners. I wanted a job that would let my thoughts walk in circles without bumping into anyone else's. My uncle had worked Oak Hill in the 80s and used to say the dead made better neighbors than most. They mind their plots, he'd grin, and I'd pretend that was funny. I didn't think about ghosts. I thought about fuel for the mowers, and edging stones straight, and the comfort of a gate that clicks shut when you ask it to. Oak Hill sits where Waco thins into pasture, a green quilt of St. Augustine grass pinned by live oaks that keep their arms even in drought. By day it's handsome, granite names kept in a discipline of rows, flags by the veterans section, a breeze that carries cut grass like familiar cologne. At dusk the edges loosen. Streetlights down on the road smudge into a butter-yellow river. Cicadas drill patience into the air, and every footstep sounds like a sentence you're almost brave enough to say. I parked by the maintenance shed that first night and told myself two things. Locks turn, grass grows. I could make those facts true. My routine settled like a fitted sheet. I'd walk the perimeter before sunset and again at closing. West Gate first, then the old cedar. Then the children's row where the lamb-topped stones make your throat do a small, involuntary thing. I learned which faucets leak, which trash lids raccoons can muscle open, which families liked their stones wiped twice. The radio on my belt kept me company with weather and baseball. I'd call out, "Oak Hill's closing," the way the last guy always had because habits cost nothing and buy more than you think. The voice found me on a Thursday that smelled like damp earth and hot metal. I had just swung the west gate shut when it said my name with my father's warning in it. Evan. Not loud, precise. I lifted my flashlight and saw only gnats, a low quilt of shadow beneath the oaks, a stone angel's nose rubbed smooth by weather. I told myself it was a neighbor kid outside the fence or a radio glitch or the tired brain of a man adjusting to night work. But the duplex felt like borrowed furniture in an empty theater when I got home. And I left the television on the lowest murmur just to hear a human mouth say anything at all. On Friday, the voice returned. Calm as a librarian, patient as a woman who knows she can outwait you. "Evan," it said, "the scar under your elbow is a crescent." I froze. I've shown that scar to exactly two people, a doctor when I was 11 and the woman who used to be my wife. I clapped my palm over it like a man patting his pockets for a wallet. The raised rim was there, small as a thumbnail. "Who's there?" I asked, the thing people in stories ask when they want the world to stay ordinary. The floodlight over the gate buzzed its insect glass buzz. The wind lifted the oak leaves and laid them down again. The dark offered nothing. If you want to measure a place, sit still in it. I tried that on Sunday. I brought my thermos and a pocket notebook and sat on Mrs. DeLeon's bench by the family plot, back to the road where the ground falls away toward the south fence. Night shrank the yard to an island under the lot lights. You hear the small lives first, birch leaves rasping each other, a pecan bouncing twice 3 rows over, the sprinklers ticking their heat away. Then a boy's voice floated up as if from the grass. My bike's behind the shed. He said my name like he'd been practicing. "Please," he added, "because boys taught to be good remember their pleases even when they're dead." I looked in daylight, because there's foolish and there's the other kind of foolish. The little cinder block shed by the west fence did have ivy clawing up the back, and behind a screwed-on panel there was a hollow filled with web and grit. My fingers closed on a handle crusted with rust, and out came a child's bicycle the color of a faded sky, front tire flat, bell dented. The thing was 30 years old if it was a day. Office records said there was a boy named Kyle in the children's row, 1998 to 2007, parents still in town. At lunch, I stood by his stone and told the heir I'd found it. The cricket started early that evening, and I decided to take that for thanks. After the bike, the whispers came the way a smell rises when rain hits dust. Not constant, more like a draft in a sealed room. They arrived while I drove the cart, when my boot heel pressed the mower's safety bar, when I straightened flags and peeled wet cellophane from bouquets. Names floated by with weights in them. Apologies arrived like notes slid under a door. Over a week, I heard about a ring taped under a tub, an envelope behind a picture frame, a ledger locked in a wall. I told myself this was the job working on me. Nights teaching my head new tricks. Either way, the unmarked row by the fence began to pull my attention the way an ache makes. You touch the same place over and over to be sure it still hurts. Those stones weren't truly blank, only worn down to pale knuckles by weather and indifference, but the effect was the same. A line of swallowed names. My radio hissed there, a soft static like breath through teeth. One evening from that row, my mother's voice arrived. Not the now voice she uses with the man who fixes copy machines, but the one from when I was 12 and she wore lipstick to out-talk the bills. "Honey," she said, and my lungs forgot what they were for. "Don't look in the Folgers can." The words reached across decades like a hand under the table. I stood with the flashlight beam quivering on a chipped stone angel and understood two things at once. I was loved once in a complicated way. Someone wanted me to keep a lid on something. The city sent help 2 months in. Manny showed up with a grin and earbuds and a body built for lifting smartly. 23. Respectful without being afraid. He learned quick how to thread the trimmer line, when to edge, which families liked their stones wiped twice. I didn't say voices. I told him about raccoons cracking lids, about the lady in the white Suburban who left her husband a new biography every Tuesday, about the mayor's plaque that went sticky with sap when the heat sat too long. A week later, I found Manny by the old cedar. The cart angled wrong, his face emptied out the way a room looks after a party's ended. "Did you hear them?" I asked, and he nodded once, then again, like an apprentice trying not to break in front of the master. "Tell them thank you," I said, feeling stupid and sure at the same time. "Even if you don't know why." He swallowed, set it into the wind, and we stood there until his hand stopped shaking. The night that moved a piece inside me came ordinary as laundry. The unmarked row breathed cool air like the nave of a church. I had my hand on the south gate's lock when a whisper fitted itself into my left ear, intimate as a confession. "March 3rd, it said. The key under the jack. The tire didn't blow on its own. The dark seemed to jolt. 10 years earlier, my ex-wife had called from the loop near Belmead. Blowout shoulder, cop helped, all fine. I kept a spare key under the jack as I had since college. I had never told anyone. The whisper ended, and the silence that replaced it weighed more than the sound had. You get used to carrying sorrows that aren't yours. They ride your belt with the pry bar and gloves. Manny started bringing a second thermos for me. On nights the wind came off the river. The voices thinned into a general hush. When it shifted east, the unmarked row brightened as if someone had turned a dimmer. The lady in the Suburban didn't come for 3 weeks, and a book lay face down in the dew with its pages fanned like a startled bird. I thought about driving by her house to make sure she was all right. The voices breathed, no. Not warning exactly, not order, but something in between. I listened. The next Tuesday she returned in sunglasses, left a thin volume about Eisenhower, and touched the stone the way you touch a shoulder in passing when words are clumsy. In late October, the ground settled around an old grave near the far fence. Not dramatic, no casket grinning from a hole, nothing for a news camera to zoom. Just a shallow saucer where the earth had been full. The way a couch remembers you after you stand. From the dip rose a word that felt like an instruction delivered to the back of my neck. Ledger. The maintenance shed's rear wall was patched with cinder blocks of slightly different grays. A poor man's brickwork. I tapped until one answered with a hollow note, worried it out with a screwdriver, and found a black book wrapped in oiled cloth gone brittle. I carried it home as if it weighed a sleeping child and set it on my kitchen table. I let it sit there an hour, because you can put off opening the thing that changes you, but you can't do that forever. Names, rows and rows of them, dates, notes that looked like ledgerman shorthand, pauper, no kin, brought by county, places where there should have been stones. There were not. Places where families had wanted one thing and gotten another. I took the book back to the unmarked row at dusk and read the first page aloud. Saying a name outside does something a living room can't do for it. The crickets rearranged themselves. A wind went along the stone tops as if a door at the end of a hallway were opening slow. An old man's voice answered me, not kind, not unkind. Keep going. So I did until my throat rasped and the lot light crackled and my shadow hinged long across the grass. The next morning I told the truth to the city clerk, the paper, and Manny. The clerk blinked hard. The reporter asked for a photograph. Manny said, "Okay, boss," the way you do when the job stands up taller and you decide to stand with it. The paper ran a Sunday piece. People brought flowers with stems that snapped in the wind. The Historical Society promised markers. The mayor came with a microphone and said words about dignity that the ground accepted politely and without interest. For a week, Oak Hill hummed with the quiet of kin who had finally been told where to stand. On Tuesday, a near sound said, "Missing page." I turned the ledger. A leaf had been cut clean from near the back, tear smoothed with time. The next page's first entry read Chandler, a surname that is mine. My chest arranged itself into a fist. I did the thing the Hill had been teaching me not to do. I hunted noise. My mother answered on the third ring, went silent long enough for a cicada to live a lifetime, then said she was coming by. She arrived with a Folgers can and set it on my table like an admission fee. "I thought I could spare you," she said, and the lipstick in her voice was 25 years gone but present anyway. She opened the can and took out a single ledger page, holes frayed where the wire binding would have been. Names in that same tidy hand. 6 entries complete, a 7th line left open after a first name that matched mine. I sat on the linoleum because chairs felt dishonest. The refrigerator motor came on and preached its sermon about bills. I took the page back to Oak Hill at dusk and taped it where it belonged. The voices did not gloat. They stood with me in the way men do at a hospital window when there's nothing clever to say. Manny saw my face and didn't ask. We had markers to set. The Historical Society sent simple stones, names and dates, the fact of being. Manny wore his church shirt and we set them in the unmarked row. Palms on warm granite the way you do when you want your hands to agree with your mouth. Relatives came like a tide that had meant to be punctual. The lady with the Suburban started a book group by her husband's stone. Paperbacks fanned like a hand of cards. Low voices, and an extra chair no one used but no one moved. A week later, a man about 30 brought a paper bag to the office and set it on my desk like an apology. Inside, a handlebar bell, circles of bright under the rubbed rust. "Found it in my mother's garage," he said. "Been there forever." I dreamed about a bench and a man reading names. He wouldn't leave his number. We walked to the children's row and he set the bell at Kyle's stone and stood very still, not crying, just letting water find its level without hurry. When the wind went through the oaks, I could have sworn the bell rang once. A tiny silver sound that had been waiting 2 decades to remember itself. "You want me to say what I did about my name?" I took my pocket notebook and on a clean page copied the 6 names from the ledger with slow care. One finger holding the book open as if that could steady anything. Then I added mine in a different ink and drew a single line through it, the way an honest clerk marks a debt paid. That night by the fence, the voices spoke not to me but around me. The way water reorganizes when you stand in a creek. One of them, my father's tone on his good morning, said, "You can change the handwriting." It didn't sound like permission. It sounded like a rule spoken gently. Sometimes now the hill is only a place to mow. Carburetor smells, sun on the back of your neck. The satisfaction of a straight edge. Other nights the air goes tight and sweet as the inside of a cardboard box. And the fence seems to lean in to hear. And if I stand too long at the row, my teeth ache with a pressure that isn't weather. The radio hisses less. The breeze is more certain. The dead approve in small ways that have nothing to do with thunderclaps. Manny, who came in grinning, began to wear earplugs less and listen more. He leaves a thermos for me on the office desk without comment. And sometimes we share sandwiches on Mrs. DeLeon's bench, not speaking. Like men who've learned that silence can be conversation when a place is listening too. If you come at dusk to Oak Hill, you might see me by the gate with my hand on the cold loop of the lock listening. If a voice says your name, don't bolt. Answer the way you would in the cereal aisle if a neighbor hailed you, and you couldn't quite place them but knew you'd shared something once. If it tells you where a lost thing is, look in daylight. If it offers a date you keep behind a doorframe in your head, sit down first. And if it says a name you don't recognize with a care that makes your throat ache, Say it back. Names are the cheapest magic we get. They cost breath. They buy a moment where a life stands where it ought to have stood all along. I don't know why my name was written and left blank. I don't know whether the line I drew across it matters to anything beyond the soft machinery of my chest. I know this, the missing are missing less now. The row by the fence no longer feels like a question asked into a wind that won't answer. On certain nights when the river air slides in and the grass lifts like fur on the arm of a sleeping animal, I hear a child's bell ring once from far off and stop, as if someone remembered to call a boy home. I turn the key. The lock clicks. The gate holds, and I carry the ring of keys to the cart in a quiet that isn't empty anymore. A quiet full of people who have decided, for tonight, to let me go home. I took the graveyard job because quiet was supposed to be cheap. You'll walk a loop, jiggle a lock, and keep the teenagers from knocking over angels, the pastor said, tapping a paper schedule with a pen that had the church's name rubbed halfway off. Copperfield Cemetery lay behind the clapboard sanctuary like a thought the town didn't finish. Floodlights hummed, moths thumped themselves silly on warm glass, and the gravel drive curled between stones with the politeness of a Sunday usher. It smelled like cut grass trying to rot, bleach from the fellowship hall mop bucket, and something iron that lived under everything, the way a nail lives under a board. The radio they gave me was a little black brick with a rubber antenna that wagged when I walked, as if disagreeing. Channel 3 was county dispatch. Channel 2 was church operations. You won't need one, the pastor said, meaning a plumber, an electrician, a priest, somebody who makes you sign papers. He didn't mention the unmarked row. You had to find that yourself, and I did. Not because it was hidden, but because it didn't announce. If the carved headstones were choir voices, the unmarked stubs were pursed lips hoarding breath. I told myself you can make friends with a place. Learn the click of the live oak by the fence when the wind comes long across the fields. Know the floodlight's cough before it steadies. Nod to the gate like it's an old man clearing his throat. For a week it worked. I did my loop, drank the coffee that tasted like a dare, and learned names without trying: Bennett, Castillo, DeVere. The unmarked ones had no names to learn. They were kneecaps of limestone just high enough to trip a boot, and just low enough to pretend innocence. On the 8th night, the radio cleared its throat. Not a voice exactly, more a shape in the static, the way steam is a shape leaving a pot. The volume wheel felt like a ridged coin under my thumb. I turned it. The shape stretched thin, became a string of syllables I didn't know. Hummed, almost sung. It made my arms prickle under my jacket. I pressed the talk button. "Who's on 2?" I said, aiming for board. Static breathed back, then a word that wasn't a word, and then another that was. "Daniel. I don't like hearing my name in places where I haven't handed it out." I swung the flashlight toward the fence, and the beam fell across the unmarked row. Under that white glare, the stones looked shorter somehow, like they'd hunched to listen. "Funny," I said to the air, expecting somebody on a couch 20 miles away to laugh into a microphone. The radio answered in a woman's tired drawl I knew too well. "Don't turn away." It was my mother's voice from the night my uncle died, spackled with exhaustion, smoothing nothing. I forgot to breathe until the light flickered and held, and I tasted dust like a penny. The next evening I arrived early to make a show of not caring. I wiped dead bugs from the floodlight lens, checked the padlocks, and pretended the radio was something to clip and forget. That held until the crickets zipped open their long zippers and the static sighed like warm air through a screen door. A prayer came through, "Our Father," said in my grandmother's rhythm, vowels rounded like stones in a jar. My mouth said the words back before my brain caught up. I could see as if I was standing there again, the church's green exit sign painting the stained glass sickly. I keyed the mic. "Dispatch, you got a copy?" A man answered, breath hitching like a truck with a loose belt. "Cold," he said, the second syllable falling away, and the radio pulled me by the curiosity like a kite string pulling a child toward cloud. The pull ended at the unmarked row. I stood with my flashlight lowered, letting the night have the higher ground. The murmurs braided, a lullaby sung wrong, someone reciting the multiplication table like penance. A grocery list tucked into an apology. "There's bacon fat in the skillet. Turn off the iron. Tell Mom the bird got out." Not last words, not always. Just last things. Ed, the retired math teacher who worked the shift before mine, shook my hand in the fellowship hall one evening. His jacket was the color of rain. "You keeping count?" he asked, chin jerking toward the yard. They don't like being skipped. I tried earplugs. Doesn't matter. Sound gets around things. He said his wife's last words were, I put the keys in the bowl, then rubbed the bridge of his nose like he could smooth the world with 2 fingers. I started a notebook. It lived in my back pocket with lint and a receipt for a transmission I couldn't afford to fix. I wrote down whatever the radio spilled. Blue dress on the line, jar under the sink, tell him the dog knows. Writing felt like opening a valve. The pressure sank a little when the ink took it. When I turned my face away, the radio filled with the softness of teeth. I swept the unmarked row with a hand broom from the shed, flattening the grass into a part like hair. The pastor found me mid-sweep and stood with his hands on his hips, which were gentle as grammar. Sometimes a grave is unmarked because nobody could afford a mark, he said. Sometimes it's unmarked because somebody didn't try. Don't go digging, Daniel. He said my name like a bell you're not supposed to ring after 10. I didn't dig, but the place did. The voices tunneled. The floodlight went out at 1 in the morning on a Tuesday, and for 3 breaths the dark was a thing with hands. I took a step and caught my boot on a root, the ground coming up to meet my palms with a soft slap. When the light thunked back, my hands were full of ants that hadn't been there a second before, running themselves crazy in circles that looked, honest to God, like letters. They scattered when I blew. The radio said my name again, not attached to a voice this time, a thought pronounced by the night. I laughed out of stubbornness and almost threw up. My cousin called to ask if I was getting weird. You sound like you're standing next to a fan, he said. I told him about the radio because it seemed like it should die in daylight, and because I wanted him to jab me back toward ordinary. He went quiet a beat and then said, Don't get pulled into something you can't finish. Danny, folks round here don't bury anything by accident. After we hung up, I stood in front of the bulletin board map, following the little crosses that marked the unmarked row. The cluster was bigger than I'd guessed, not neat. Families gathered, friendships spaced. If grief has geometry, this was it. Mini cliffhangers found their rhythm. A lullaby, then silence sharp enough to nick a thought. A prayer cut clean at as it is, then rubber-shoed footsteps in the gravel behind me when I wasn't moving. One night a child's voice counted slow and careful, tucking numbers into the dark like blankets. I crouched without meaning to. The counting stopped at 9 and the radio hissed in a pleased way like a cat that's found your warm spot on the couch. The next night the man with the hitching breath reappeared and unspooled a confession shaped like a ditch, a bicycle wheel, a church light, a note, and the word, sorry, said until the corners wore off. Unknown felt like mercy, he whispered, and the floodlight didn't flicker while he did. It only watched Ed quit, left his jacket. The tape label on his radio said Edie in blunt black marker, a toddler's signature. The pastor said Ed had gone to Crockett for a while, which is Texas for we don't ask. The voices thickened. A woman pronounced my name like the floodlight did, practical, admitting, and told me to go past the fence. There was a side gate I hadn't noticed because it wasn't meant to be. It didn't lock. It just asked you to be the kind of person who wouldn't push. I pushed. The chain clanked like somebody turning too fast with coins in their pocket, and I walked into the lot where a house used to be and was gone. The grass had the look of erasure that changed its mind. Here, the voice said, and something like a cold wind in a shut room rushed up and settled around my hands. My palm met the ground and found a button, silver, dull, with a flower stamped into it, the petals rubbed soft by whatever rubbed them last. Beside it, a shred of blue cloth the size of a handkerchief, stained the color of rainwater from a tin roof. I froze exactly the way a man freezes when the world tells him it knows a secret of his that he doesn't. Then I stood, walked back like a kid with a frog cupped in both hands, and set the button and the cloth on the fellowship hall counter under the leak that had never been fixed. The deputy came with a cardboard box that said evidence in a font that did not look like it could hold grief. He took the things and said, "Storm coming," though the sky outside was a hard blue plate. After he left, the pastor made decent coffee from the good can he kept locked up, and we drank it with the door propped. We didn't say blessing or closure or recovery. He said, "Sometimes we keep the wrong silence." I said, "Sometimes the wrong silence keeps us." The radio lay face down on the table like a dog determined not to hear the word bath. For a few nights the whispers thinned, like people leaving a room without scraping chairs. I wondered if the button had been a coin for a ferryman I didn't believe in. I wondered if I'd made the mistake of thinking I was there to fix. Then somebody spoke from under the floodlight with a voice as square as a farmer's hands. 3 more things under the place where the porch had been. I took the broom and swept that lot until the grass lay flat and shining, and every time the bristles found a nail or a marble or a bottle cap, I felt heat behind my eyes, as if the hand that had dropped it had reached back through time and shaken mine. I didn't dig. That's true. I would have if one more something had asked. Instead, I read my notebook back to the stones like bedtime. Names I didn't have replaced with errands I did. Keys in the bowl. Turn off the iron. Jar under the sink. Blue dress on the line. Sometimes the radio purred. Sometimes it slept. Once, while I read, the floodlight died in a breath you could hear, and the dark arrived with a soft thud. In that thick, the word came again, not a command so much as a laying on of a hand, remember. It had 100 mouths in it, and they weren't hungry anymore. They were tired. On my last night, the pastor clasped my hand with both of his as if I might float off if he didn't wait me. "We'll get someone new," he said. "Tell him what you can." I left my notebook on the shelf above the chargers with a label that said, "Read me. Whoever comes next will learn the frost of names and the clock of moths and the way the unmarked stones are not stubs at all but teeth that chose not to chew. You if you keep talking. He'll learn that last words rarely sound like last words. He'll learn that some families tuck their dead into anonymity because anonymity is cheaper, or kinder, or both. He'll learn that a blue dress can keep breeze in it long after anyone claims it." I slept on my cousin's couch that morning and dreamed of rinsing instead of burying. White rope strung between 2 mesquites, shirt pins shining, a dress lifting with the wind that belongs to everyone. In the dream, I didn't know the owner. That was the point. When I woke, the house was warm already, and the radio was not on my belt, but it spoke anyway, in the place where thoughts speak before they turn into language. "Remember," it said, and the word didn't drag. It steadied. It smelled like cut grass and rain that hadn't fallen yet. It sounded like a gate that swings without squeal because someone, finally, oiled it. I still hear them when the air conditioner starts, or when the dryer clicks loose change into a small sermon. Tell him the dog knows. Coffee's on. Turn the iron off. Pick up the blue dress. There are worse congregations. There are worse commandments. When I drive past the church on an errand and the floodlight hovers and hums, I park, walk to the fence, and tip my head toward the unmarked row. I say the names I don't know by saying the errands I do. A little breeze travels the grass, and the grass answers in a language I'm almost certain I'll understand if I keep listening. A lullaby sung wrong that still puts a person to sleep. A prayer said halfway that still opens a door. Last things spoken aloud so they don't have to keep being last in the dark. I don't turn away. Not anymore. I didn't go up there because I loved being scared. I went because Hannah had that look when she dared you. Chin tipped, half a smile like a paper cut. And because Diego had the car and a talent for acting like nothing in this county could touch him. You only heard about the cemetery on the hill from people who had driven there, then laughed about how nothing happened, then left a little too fast. We left after 11, taking the switchback slow because Diego had a new rattle in the Civic, and because the wind was pushing down from the plateau, dry and sour with cedar. San Marcos fell behind in neat cartridges of light. Dorm windows, the radio tower's red eyelid, the river like a strip of aluminum foil. Hannah kept one knee against my seat, jiggling, pretending it was the music. "You know the bell doesn't exist," she said. "Rusted through, broken, that's the official line." Diego grinned and tapped the wheel and told us how his cousin's friend heard it. 14 tolls at midnight, each one matching a voice under the ground. He told it playful, but his shoulders got tight when he missed a gear. The gate at County Road 428 tilted on its hinge and let us through if we sweet-talked it. Barbed wire slouched between cedar posts. Mesquite hunched. Prickly pear paddles showed their bitten rims. The graveyard announced itself the way bones do in hard soil. Suggestion, then certainty. Headstones leaned like bad teeth. Wooden crosses blackened to the color of bad coffee. My flashlight gave everything a bleached, winter-sick tint. Diego's torch smeared its light like a thumb across butter. Hannah stayed just behind us, reading names out of habit and out of respect, which can be the same thing. We found the stump of the bell tower at the hill's crown, a ragged cylinder of limestone mortared with shell and memory. The bell that used to live there sat on the ground in two pieces, cracked along a line thick as a finger, its green-brown skin mapped by rain. Hannah rapped her knuckles on it and winced as if she'd touched a piano and found a note nobody should hear. "See," she said. "Nothing to ring." She took a picture anyway and flinched at her own flash. "Then how come people hear it?" Diego said, aiming his light past us further up the slope where the grave markers thinned. "Cousin of mine swears he heard 12 one night. Said each one made him feel like he'd left a door open somewhere." "But your cousin's always got a story," Hannah said, softer by a shade. She was a reporter for the campus paper, and worse than that, curious on the days curiosity was a kind of hunger. We walked between stones with our hands to ourselves. Names had worn into weather. The newer markers were poured concrete with letters like hills softened by 100 summers. I kept my hands in my jacket, though the night wasn't cold. It felt rude to show my fingers. The path made itself for us, a crease in the grass where boots and deer had agreed. That was when I found the iron ring. It rose from the ground a few inches thick as a wrist, welded to the lid of something metal. The earth around it was lipped and tired, as if someone had pried at it once, then twice, then given up. Hannah came up beside me and said, "Don't," which made it impossible not to. I knelt, ran my thumb over the iron's scab texture, and smelled the penny tang of old rain. Diego wandered to the stump and climbed it the way he climbed everything, as if height owed him apology. Midnight didn't arrive like a clock. It arrived like a breath you've been holding without noticing. The wind paused. The mesquite went from whispering to listening. I was thinking about the ring and how doors are doors even when they look like lids, when a sound rose from the stump. Not loud, not even clear at first, just a soft, shaped pressure in the chest. A bell, except impossible. I didn't say anything because you don't break a sound like that with words, the way you don't interrupt a grandmother telling a story. The second tone followed the first, a little stronger, like someone at the bottom of a well-realizing air exists. The third toll grew a skin of grit and sang through it. This time I heard something beneath it. Not words yet, breath finding a shape, a voice pressing against the note. On the fourth, Hannah said my name in a voice that meant, "Tell me this is a trick." On the fifth, Diego's big light jittered and steadied, and his jaw went tight. On the sixth, the pressure changed. My ribs felt miscounted, as if the bell were using them to decide how big a body should be. The seventh arrived threaded with syllables I didn't know I knew. A lullaby my mother hummed when I had croup, a funeral prayer I'd learned from a program and forgotten, the way a boy in my high school said sorry when he meant don't tell. The toll gathered them all and pushed them through the throat of the hill until my ears held them like coins you can't spend. Diego's big light threw our shadows over the broken bell, and for a second the halves looked whole again. "Okay," Hannah said, brittle. "Okay, someone put a speaker in there." "No one put anything," Diego said. But he didn't move to check, and when the eighth toll came, he flinched like a man who had been struck before and learned to expect it. The ninth ran a wire down my spine and tugged. The 10th made the iron ring tick as metal flexes when heat decides it belongs. I put my palm on the ring without deciding to. All I wanted was for the noise to stop. That's what I told myself even as I curled my fingers under and felt the way the ground was not ground, but a lid waiting for a hand. The ring was warmer than the air. I didn't pull. I only tested it, which is the same thing when the thing tested wants you to. The 11th toll pressed words I understood under the note. Not sentences yet, fragments. 3 names I've never said out loud since. A soft, weary please that didn't know who to face while it said itself. The 12th had more voices. Not a crowd exactly, a braid. That is what fear does when it is old. It takes smaller, quiet things and braids them until you hear only a single strong rope. We ran when the 13th came. That is the simple telling. We remembered the fence and forgot the gate, and Hannah tore her sleeve and didn't notice. The bell followed us down the slope without being louder, the way a smell follows you after you leave a kitchen where onions were cut. In the car, the 14th toll found the footwell as if the Civic were ajar, and someone had poured the sound inside. Diego drove like the story's ending had a stop sign we could beat. For a week, the dorm ducks breathed the bell. I woke to my heart counting. Hannah called at 2 a.m. about the wind on her ceiling. Diego drank more. We didn't go back. Of course we went back. The second time it was 4 of us, me, Hannah, Diego, and Tyler, a lanky kid from our floor who swam laps at the aquatic center under fog, and broke into a laugh like someone tipping a bucket of nails when the lifeguard cleared him out. Tyler believed in levers. He loved the idea. Any stuck thing would come loose if he found the right place to pry. He brought a crowbar, wraps for our hands, and the kind of enthusiasm that makes you furious and fond at once. Sunday afternoon was quiet. The gate groaned like an old man pleased to be consulted. Up top, the stump waited the way a teacher waits when they suspect you've done the reading. The lid with the ring was where I'd left it. Lipped earth, tired circle. Tyler spat to the side like the world was a baseball diamond and worked the bar under the edge. Quick, yeah? Diego said, but Tyler said, quick is for people who think the world is a machine, and leaned. The first pull shrugged off rust. The second made the ring jump like a coin in a fountain. On the third, the lid gave an inch inside a damp breath. Hannah turned her face and then turned it back because refusing to look felt like giving the place a win it hadn't earned. We set the lid aside with more care than we meant to. The opening wasn't a cistern. It was a shaft with stone walls laid carefully, angling down into a square black throat. We shone our lights and the beams climbed into chalky floating dust and then found their way down to the shape that waited. The beam found a bell below, whole, hung on a beam thick as a man's thigh, its clapper bound tight with rawhide gone black. From the clapper, a rope climbed back up through a pulley to the stump above. The rope older than all our grandparents and somehow still strong enough to teach us a lesson. Along the shaft's walls, iron rings bit into stone at intervals, most empty, some still holding the hairy stubs of rope. The floor was not floor. It was deeper. Close it, Hannah said. We should close it now. Tyler had his lower lip pulled between his teeth, something like awe in his face that I recognized because awe is grief waiting for a job. You hear that? He asked. I did. Not a toll yet. A shape, the negative space a toll would leave behind. The rope twitched like a vein. The rawhide cinch creaked a hair. My hand landed on the crowbar without me telling it to. Diego grunted and set his palm against the lid like a brake. The wind above us flattened and all the leaves that had been whispering turned to listen. The first toll from down in the shaft was smaller than the ones on the hilltop and larger than anything I'd heard in a room. It sized us. It measured the walls and our bones and the air between. The second came without a gap, as if time in that hole had been folded to save space. Words rose under the note like steam through deckboards. Let me out, let me sleep, no, not me, not me. And there, threading all of it, the shape of a voice so familiar my knees forgot their job. It sounded like Hannah and not like her at all. And in that way, it was exactly like every recording of yourself you hate. Tyler laughed. It was tender, which scared me worse than anger would have. He leaned forward to hear better, to catch the voice as if it were a fish that might slip back into the dark. The rope bulged, then loosened like a stomach after a held breath. The third toll slid between our ribs and out our backs. The fourth trailed the word please in a dozen accents. Hannah took the rawhide in both hands and hauled. Not to free it, to choke it tighter. The bell disagreed. The next toll arrived anyway, exact and patient as a metronome. There are choices you make and choices that walk through you using your name like a borrowed coat. I chose to drop the crowbar. Diego chose to shove Tyler back. Tyler chose to smile wider. He had learned to grin at the instant before things tipped. He did it now because he'd never learned not to. The rope and the rawhide and the bell made another choice, and the sixth toll stood on our backs like a rider. We slammed the lid. It made a sound like a book ending a long argument. The ring jumped and bit my thumb, and the small pain let me breathe. We're done, Hannah said. For the space of 2 breaths we were. Then the lid rattled from below. A patient tapping, and Tyler's hands were on the iron ring with a gentleness that broke my heart. Again, he whispered, not to us. If I tell you we held him back, I'd be telling you the version where we were better than our fear. The truth is simpler. The count had us and kept going. 7, 8, 9. The rope sang like a violinist tuning for the saddest song in the world. 10, I tasted iron and old rain. 11. Hannah made a sound that wasn't a word. 12. The wind outside withdrew like someone snuffing a candle with 2 wet fingers. 13. The clapper gathered itself. 14. The lid lifted without hands. Tyler said, please. It was the last whole word he said. He meant it at the hill, the way a kid means it to a mother who already said no. The 17th toll rang in the dark, and when it finished, we could not immediately say where he was. Not dragged, not yanked, not cinematic, present then not. The way a truth goes quiet and becomes a story people mutter with the windows open. The rope swung once, looking for a weight to remember. It did not find one. Hannah pressed both palms on the lid and sobbed once, an ugly, honest sound. Diego backed away and then forward like a man who couldn't decide which side of a door he belonged on. We told the sheriff what we could stand to repeat. We kept back the rest because the town had to sleep sometime, and because there is a difference between what's true and what a place can hold. Searchers with dogs ranged the hills and came back with sunburn, and a report about old stone and fresher footprints. The priest blessed the stump and said a mass nobody asked for. He touched the cracked bell and came away with rust on his palm. The bell outside slept in its broken bowl. The one below did not sleep at all. Classes resumed. People laughed in hallways and then remembered to be gentle with their mouths when they passed the empty chair in freshman comp. Diego stopped telling certain jokes. Hannah wore her sleeves pushed up like someone ready to lift something heavy. I avoided vents and hollow places. At night, the count resumed from a number we hadn't left it on. Weeks later, on a noon so perfect it felt like a lie trying to apologize, Hannah beckoned me to the library steps. She didn't say hello. I recorded it last night, she whispered. I won't play it. It's enough knowing I could. She turned her phone face down. It's not just there. It's everywhere that will act like a throat. I said the hill didn't make the bell. It trained it. That night I drove alone. I left the car on the road and walked the last stretch because the sound of gravel under tires felt like an announcement, and I wanted to arrive like a thought you think only halfway. The padlock had been changed, but locks obey old habits. The stump was black against hard stars. I set my hand on the ring and it felt like a pulse. I lifted, not entirely. I worried the lid just enough to let breath pass and then pressed it shut, a rhythm I learned from my mother's sewing machine. The bell kept time through me. Between one breath and the next, a voice gathered itself, not from Hannah or Tyler or me, but from someone older and patient. It said a single word I will not repeat, not because it is obscene, but because after you hear it, your days make a different shape around it. The word is the sound any town makes when it learns what it was built on. At dawn, the mesquite turned to black scribbles, and the river below picked up the first light like a handful of coins. Somewhere a bus hissed. The count did not stop. It never stops. That's the thing nobody writes on brochures. We peel names off headstones with our eyes and call it history. Underneath, the bell asks for volunteers. If you go, if you must, you will find the ring right where I found it, warm as a mouth. You will tell yourself you only want to make the noise stop. You will be telling the smallest part of the truth. I don't tell you the word the bell used for me. I let it live where it lives. But sometimes, walking past the aquatic center at night, the air tastes like old rain, and I count my steps and find the count stutter the way a voice does when it remembers a song it promised not to sing. In that pause, if I stand very still, I hear a laugh I know. It isn't cruel or kind. It is the shape a hill makes when it keeps what it is owed. I used to tell people I went because the grass grew fast in East Texas and somebody had to keep the ants off the stone. That sounded practical, like a yard chore you tuck between picking up milk and returning a call. The truth was simpler and heavier. After my shift at the diner, I needed a place where the noise stopped. The cemetery behind the water tower has that kind of quiet that isn't empty. It's attentive. It listens back. Beth's spot sits just inside the iron gates where the ground dips and keeps the days damp. The caretakers keep a laminated map that splits the place into neat sections. Veterans here, families there, children over by the old oak. And they draw their lines with the kind of tidy authority that makes you forget the world bleeds past its edges. The children's section is smaller than you think and more crowded. Little stones huddle like teeth. The grass is softer there. It holds footprints. The air carries a smell you can't buy in a bottle, a suggestion of crayons, sweet chapstick, warm plastic from a doll left in a car. I kneel, brush clippings off the temporary granite marker, and talk about small things, how the fryer at work spits, how the lady at the florist lets me pull expired stems from the bin, how I am eating, sleeping, performing the motions of a survivor whether or not my heart believes me. I fill the silence because I'm scared of what might talk if I don't. The first time I hear laughter, I decide it's teenagers. Teenagers climb fences. Teenagers take six-packs where adults won't. Teenagers love a dare like a dog loves a bone. The sound trickles from deeper in the children's section, a breathy titter, the kind kids make when you tell them to whisper because someone's resting. I stand, more irritated than scared, and call out. My voice gets swallowed in the live oaks. The laughter eases back the way people do when they don't want to be found. When I turn around, the little lamb I keep on Beth's marker, white plastic, one ear scraped from a car window years ago, is facing the opposite direction, toward the far corner where the fence folds on itself. I tell myself the wind can manage small miracles. I turn the lamb back toward the gate, set a pebble at its hoof like a chalk line, and go home feeling watched by something that doesn't have eyes. The next night, the lamb faces the corner again. I tell the wind to mind its business and start down the path. Toys line it as if a church group tried kindness and lost heart. A rubber ball cratered with gravel, 3 toy cars, 2 action figures with their paint rubbed off at the noses, a headless ballerina, a tin whistle with a bend that leaves a gray bite on my thumb. Each piece faces the corner where an old stone arch carries the name of a teacher I've never noticed. B. Martin, 1911. The toys aren't new. Dirt sits in their seams. The rubber is chalky at the edges. They look like things excavated from a childhood no one properly put away. I don't know why I follow the line. Grief loves instructions, even bad ones. The air goes thin as I move. Grass whispers against my jeans. Cicadas whine their rusty hinges. Moths snap like ash in my flashlight beam. The last toy in the row, the tin whistle, feels colder than the others, like it remembers a mouth. Far off, a song drifts in. Not a tune exactly, but the hum people make while waiting for one to start. I tell myself it's the highway. I tell myself a thing I do not believe. The toys make a new pattern the night after that. Not a line. A hopscotch, squares measured by careful gaps, an invitation to step. My body knows how before I agree. I hop, ridiculous with my flashlight, and feel halfway in that I'm being counted. At the arch, the ground sinks an inch under my shoes. A soft pocket where the fence seems to hold its breath. In the middle of a toy circle lies a nest woven from balloon ribbons and faded string. Something pink glints in the pile. I lift it. A cheap ring with a cloudy stone, the kind that stains a finger green. Heat moves through me the way hot water moves through an old pipe, rattling at every bend. I do not wear it. I do not throw it away. I put it in my pocket like a coin you know you will spend without meaning to. Mom. The voice comes from everywhere and exactly nowhere. Too high, too far, a month older than it should be, and still it makes my hands shake. Beth? I say, because mothers are not immune to their favorite lies. We just tell them with better accents. The choir of small voices draws closer. Lullabies braid into playground chants the way only children can do it. All breath and essy sounds and the careful weight they put on rhymes they think matter. They aren't loud. They don't have to be. Something in the iron carries them. Every bar in the fence hums like a tuning fork touched with a thumb. I tell no one for a week. You don't share from a cup that finally fills you. I work my shifts, pour coffee for men who think napkins solve everything, and let the songs stick to me like flour dust. Each night, the toys make a different map. A circle, a spiral, an aisle. One arrangement spells a word with jump rope curves and crayon stubs and cars set as tidy as letters on a birthday cake. Stay. Seeing it sends a relief through me so strong I sit without meaning to. It is a strange mercy to be told what to do. The choir swells when I stay. New tones braid in. A boy voice not yet broken. A tiny voice that can't catch the L in lullaby. Something lower that I decide must be the teacher. My flashlight shakes. Moths clatter through it. Tears come with a clean heat that feels useful, like washing a cut. When the songs stop, they don't taper. They drop quick as a conductor's hand. In the vacuum of that hush, a scrape sounds behind the teacher's stone. Not animal. Not entirely human. A sound with a pause in it like thinking. Hello? I say and hear the coward in it. The toys shift, not a tumble, not wind. A slide 2 inches to the right, every piece together. As if a classroom of children obeyed a rule you can't see. Their faces turn toward me. Barbie's blank smile, the ballerina's neck stump, the lamb's gentle nose. It feels like a congregation turning to watch a bride come down the aisle, except the aisle points into the earth. I step into it. The ground gives like a mattress that has learned my weight. At the arch, the nest of ribbons waits. I put the ring back. I whisper, I'm here. The response presses against me like warm breath on a winter window. A child-sized shape stands in my light the way a kid stands behind a curtain, more suggestion than girl. She lifts a hand to her cheek, shy the way Beth used to be when she wanted to be asked twice. I open my arms. The shape does too. When we touch, I feel a plastic hair clip and the cottony bump of a bow, and against my chest a small, determined shake, not from fear but from effort, like she is pulling something heavy and needs me to stand still. Maybe I would have gone all the way into that quiet if the deputy didn't come by on his rounds. Headlights stitch the fence bars into bright thread. A door thunks. Boots grind gravel. "Evenin'," he calls, soft with the caution of a man who has dealt with grief before. Cemeteries closed. The choir tucks itself under its blankets in a breath. The weight in my arms thins until I hold the pose of an embrace with nothing in it. The toys go neutral. When he reaches me, his flashlight finds the ring in the nest and the lamb on the path and my face stiff with salt. He doesn't write anything down. He looks at me in that small-town way that is half suspicion, half pity, the mixture people keep in the glove box. "I lost track of time," I say. He nods like a man measuring what he's willing to believe. "Folks are worried," he says. "You gotta let her rest." The words are gentle and useless. I say I will. I mean it in the way you mean it to a sleeping child you intend to carry anyway. I stay away 2 nights because I am obedient in public and wild in private. The house sounds like a jar I can't open. The ring on my nightstand warms under my palm as if it stored someone else's heat. On the 3rd night I go back before dusk to be legal if he swings by. The lamb lies face down in the dirt. Not turned, knocked. Anger threads the sorrow in a bright wire. "No," I say loud in the quiet, and I embarrass myself and please myself in the same breath. The toys have become rows. A space at the front, an aisle. If a bell rings, I don't hear it, I feel it. The grass at my calves leans all at once, like 1,000 small bodies taking a seat. I think of the teacher's stone and the year cut into it, and how patterns outlast the people who make them. I think attendance. I almost leave. I picture the deputy's boots. I picture the church lady who held my hand at the register and said counseling and boundaries without blinking. I picture Beth riding quiet behind me in the back seat, chin tucked, the way she did when she was tired and didn't want to admit it. I do not leave. I start asking questions because that is what you do when you are half in and afraid to admit it. At the office window, the woman with the ledger squints at me over a brass clip. When I ask about the teacher's stone, B. Martin, 1911, she flips through a green book with the careful speed of someone who believes paper is skin. "Beatrice Martin," she says, "kept the one-room schoolhouse by the river. Fever year, the big one, they used the hill for overflow." She lowers her voice though no one else is there. "Families split their dead," she says, tapping the map. "Parents here, children there." On my way out, she leans toward the glass the way people lean toward secrets. Sometimes Sundays around 5, I hear singing over there. Not church songs. Not exactly. Don't repeat that. I promise and know I will. At home, I set the lamb on the table and scrub the dirt from its ear with a toothbrush because it feels like something to do with my hands. The brush rasps, the plastic shines, and for a second the clean spot makes the rest seem filthier, and I nearly climb into the sink to keep going. I catch myself and laugh a laugh I don't like. I try the TV. The sound gushes and leaves me emptier. When I turn it off, the house holds the sucked-out hush of a chapel after a funeral, when everyone is still sitting because no one wants to be first to scrape their chair. One morning I find the ring turned on the nightstand. The pink stone aimed at the window as if it has been taught to face east. I tell myself I did it in my sleep, and button my shirt fast like speed can outrun a thought. At the diner, I catch myself humming over the hiss of the grill. And Dale, one of those men who think your life happened to you because of how you hold your shoulders, says, "That sounds familiar." And I say, "It isn't." So sharply he lifts his hands and drinks his coffee like he planned to apologize to it. The deputy's name, because I finally ask, is Hines. He has a father's hands and a bachelor's way of standing too close to his own truck. The next time he finds me, he doesn't walk me all the way to the gate. He stands with me a while at Beth's marker and looks at the lamb like it is either a trap or a clue. "You hear talk?" he asks. I don't ask of what kind. In a small place, talk has flavors, and you can tell which one you're being fed by the look in a man's eye. "Just singing," I say. He studies the corner and clears his throat like the fence did the first night. When he leaves, he says, "I got kids," as if that's supposed to be a warning and a permission slip at the same time. And I think me too. And the thought is shadow and light in the same breath. The nest waits another night. The ring is gone. In the center lies the lamb on its back, belly up like a toy in a catalog. Sit, says a child's voice, sweet as thaw, and I do. The soil remembers knees and makes hollows for mine. Hands touch my wrists, small, many, businesslike. They are not cruel. They are efficient, the way kids are who've learned a routine. Something older counts, 1, 2, like a teacher checking rows. The choir gathers breath. Warmth pools around my ankles, and then the cool wicks in. A tide you do not see coming until your shins ache. The shape in my arms trembles, not from fear but from work, as if she is lifting a lid I cannot help lift. I don't know what you want, I say. And the little voices answer together, stay, singing it as a round until the word blurs into a feeling. The shape leans back to show me its face, and it isn't a face. More the idea of one. Eyes where you expect them, the way dew suggests eyes on a web. Can I see you? I ask because grief is greedy and it tries. What flickers there holds every child and no child. The way a choir holds voices you could never separate without breaking the song. I hold it anyway. It tries to be my girl for me. I forgive it for failing. Hines comes again. Headlights right bars across the grass. Ma'am? He calls, more firm now. The choir zips itself shut. I stand because there are two kinds of obedience, and I have picked mine. He walks me to the gate, and his keys jingle a polite threat. People talk. The office adds another sign about hours. A sermon gets preached about letting go and giving grief to God. I work more shifts and learn you can hum under a fryer and nobody notices. I come earlier and stay longer. The toys try different alphabets. One afternoon, the pattern isn't letters or rows, but arrows. Every car and doll and headless ballerina's neck points at the dip where the fence cups its hand. The lamb points too. I stop pretending I choose anything. The last night, rain threatens and holds back the way it does when it wants you to say please. Wind chatters the bars. The ground smells newly turned, though the shovel is a century old. I bring fresh batteries, as if light has ever argued anyone out of what they love. The aisle is there, ready. I sit when told. The hands do their work. When the soil rises over my shoes, I picture headlines Hines will hate writing. I picture the church lady's mouth falling into the shape of O. I picture Beth in the back seat after a long nap, rubbing her eyes with fists that smell like graham crackers. I choose the picture that lets me breathe. The cool climbs my calves, my knees, my thighs. The earth presses its ear to me, listening back. The choir sings the way a classroom sings when a teacher points to the page, and every mouth is brave because it is not alone. The shape in my arms grows heavier, as if the song is a rope and we are on opposite ends, and finally we are pulling the same direction. There is an afterword because stories that find other mouths always have one. They notice disturbed ground and say words like tragic and troubled, and we did what we could. They set the lamb back on the marker and someone cleans its ear with a wet wipe and says there, that's better. The ring is not found. The fence gets a new lock that complains louder. People ask Hines if he saw anything, and he says he saw someone leave when asked, and that should have been the end of it. Only, some nights the groundskeeper finds the toys all pointing the same way, and blames raccoons because a man needs something with a tail to blame. Some afternoons a breeze goes through the corner and sounds like children holding a note the way they hold their breath before a surprise. Once in a while a mother stops at the gate, meaning to visit and failing to step through, and hears a song she can't name and hums it anyway because her mouth remembers. If you stand where the aisle used to be, with your hands at your sides and your eyes closed, you will feel a little tug at your cuffs, the polite touch a child gives when she wants you to kneel. You might hear your name in a voice that has no reason to know it, said with the bright delight children save for what they love. You will think you imagined it. You will turn to leave. The toys will be pointing, and the gate will sound like a bell that has been waiting a very long time to be rung. I was scraping mud off my boots with a butter knife when the radio hissed and said my name. The porch boards were damp, the air sour with that bucket smell you get when a mop has been left too long, and the Brazos was still swollen and brown from weeks of rain. Dewey had called out sick, so the night run fell to me, and Sheriff Mendez likes a deputy who will drive straight into trouble as long as the road is still there. That is how I ended up at the Riverside graveyard with a trunk full of rope, a mag light, and the feeling you get when a storm looks like it still has something left to say. The calls had started ordinary and then drifted sideways. First it was stalled cars and drowned calves and fences gone missing under the current. Then kids said they heard singing in the ditches. A woman swore the flowers on her husband's grave moved like they were breathing. On Tuesday, Doyle Kincaid drove out to the graveyard and came home with no hat, and a stare that made his wife call us. Voices, she told the dispatcher. He says they are in the water. She said it twice, like a person tasting a word she did not want to swallow. The cemetery sits on a flat beside Old Farm Road 23. In dry years, it looks like a checkerboard of tidy stones. In wet years, it looks like a map of islands that do not agree where the shoreline is. By the time I parked at the gate, the frogs had tuned up and the floodlights the county rented were flickering, the way electricity does when the ground itself is part of the circuit. I took the chain off, touched my hat to the little metal cross Mrs. Pennington wired to the post, and stepped into mud that tugged at my boots like a tired hand. I found the first box 30 yards in. It was not the polished kind, only rough boards with a lid bowed where the ground had bulged. Water had darkened the wood to tea, and the crack down the center showed nothing but a strip of night. I told myself it was only shadow, because that is what you tell yourself until the second it stops being true. A breath later, the radio crackled again, and beneath the static I heard a small sound like a mouth underwater trying careful words. Unit 2, are you on site? Mendez asked. On the ground, I told him. Riverside Graveyard. Water is up. Boxes are loose. Copy, he said. We have choir reports countywide. Wind in the culverts. He said it like he wanted me to agree so it would be true. Then I heard them plain. Sound travels on water like gossip. These were not frogs or wind. They were low, wet syllables, a dozen at a time, like people speaking through river mouths. The voices came in threads that drifted apart and then braided together again. Underneath, faint. A tune I knew from my mother humming when she smoked and washed dishes, some small hymn that fit her lungs. That tune finding me out there in county mud had my hands shaking in a way my training does not cover. The voices were not just in that one box. Another coffin had turned sideways and wedged against a stone, its lid knocking a chain in a patient rhythm. I looped rope around the nearest one, then around a headstone that read Mother, because stone is a good anchor and I needed the word as much as I needed the weight. Something tapped the underside of the lid, a second tap. The radio spat and I heard my own voice say, visual on unsecured casket, but the words slurred and slowed and dropped into a girl's breathless tone. Evan, foot is caught. 10 years ago, a girl's foot really had been caught in a flood down on the low road. I went in after her and the current took the conversation away. They found her days later where the river decided to lay her. I do not talk about it. The radio did. Foot is caught, it said in a voice I had only ever let live in my head. I shut the radio off, the way you put a palm over a child's mouth during hide and seek when your breath gives you away. Boards speak when they rub. Nails have their own small vocabulary. The lid said no and yes as the current nosed it. I eased the rope tighter and the crack widened. A pale thing pressed there, hand or not hand. Skin steeped the color of old wax. Fingers spread obedient and stopped at daylight like someone had taught them manners they still remembered. Evan, said the water where the hand met the crack. Not the boards. The water. I went deeper because some names you answer. The ground dropped without warning and the river climbed to my knees. Cold pin needles up my legs. I was halfway to the second box when the real yelling started. A man was pinned against the fence by a coffin that had levered itself whole out of the ground and decided he would do as a post. Do not move, I shouted, which is the kind of useless advice you give when someone could not move if they wanted to. I got a shoulder against slick wood and it pushed back the way a long day pushes. Help me, he said, and then, almost politely, she is telling me about a school dance. His head went forward like he had been kissed too hard and he slumped. Fainted, not dead. That helped. The coffin floated just enough for his legs to slide free. I dragged him by the collar and felt my spine write a complaint letter. That is when I noticed the voices were not only in the boxes. They were braided into the current itself, traveling the ditches like power lines carry a hum. Not English, not entirely, but framed like sentences. A lower one kept intoning a word I almost understood. It felt like attendance, and I wished I had not thought it. We got him, Birch, according to his wallet, over the fence by a series of small, stupid miracles. I stayed between him and the fog where shapes can be anything. I kept my gun in its holster because you do not draw on a flood. The river brought a small thing bumping my thigh like a cat. A cassette in a milky case with tidy blue letters that read Church Picnic 1989. It tapped me again, polite. I pocketed it the way you pocket a dare. Back at the truck, the engine did what engines do when you beg. It remembered fire. I did not look back toward the graves because attention is a form of agreement. At the clinic, under lights that smelled like disinfectant and old bleach, Birch refused a shot and said, "Could you bring me one voice?" They owe me an apology. I copied the sentence into my notebook and later saw the words pressed so hard they carved the next page. At home near dawn, the porch dripped syllables into the mud. The drain in the tub cleared its throat. My phone revived long enough to show a voicemail from a number that was only zeros. 30 seconds of wet breathing. Then the lullaby again, like someone humming with river water in their mouth. I put the cassette on the table and made coffee and stared at both like they might tell me which was more dangerous. We closed the graveyard that day and tied what we could. The county pump coughing and stuttering like an old smoker. Some boxes settled. Others refused. The river rose again that night because a dam up county had to spill. The ground breathed. I told myself I was not going back. Then I went back. You can call it duty, or you can call it whatever my mother called the thing that made her check the locked door twice, and then a third time she would not admit to. The gate chain scraped. The little cross winked in fog, and the frogs swelled, then cut off as if someone turned a dial. I checked ropes, retied knots, and found the rough box by feel. The crack was wider. Darkness down there smelled like pennies in old hands. The water said attendance again, not in a voice but in pressure, in the suggestion of syllables along my boots and the pump line and the fence. Deputy, it suggested without sound. Call the names. I do not know them, I told the dark. It seemed like a prayer that wanted to be refused. You know enough, the river suggested. So I read stones under my light until the fog made halos of everything. I said mother, I said father, I said infant daughter. And the water made a soft closed mouth sound. I said Doyle Kincaid even though he was not planted here, and hoped the river would not take that as permission. Then I said my own name by accident, the way your eyes skip a line when you're nervous. Present, the water said. I stood with my heart banging like a fish in a bucket and tried not to raise my hand. The frogs stayed quiet. The crickets took a breath. Something large turned out on the bend and the fog sagged like a bedsheet at the foot of a mattress. My light hit it and turned into its own wall. Behind it I heard the lullaby swell, voices climbing like they were getting ready to surface. I left the boxes to their talk and walked backward to the gate, because running in mud gets you face first and full of what wants you quiet. At the fence I made my mistake and turned. The fog folded and a human shape waded in, coat slung, hat slick. The hands lifted in a slow it is okay gesture, and the water on them did not drip. It slid back toward the sleeves like gravity had changed its mind. He did not open his mouth when he said my name. He did not need to. The river said it. I got home with the cassette and with the smell of wet grave dirt in the truck, even with the windows down. I found my old player in the garage, the one with baseball grease in its seams, and let the tape spin. Hiss, then laughter, then a woman. No, start lower. A hymn I knew, but the verse order was wrong, like the book had been dropped in the mud and the pages put back together wet. Somewhere inside the choir, a girl's laugh brightened and then went thin as it was pulled away by distance that was not measured in feet. That night the bathtub drain learned consonants. Words formed in the gurgle and broke. I stood there with a flashlight, the beam making a clean circle on porcelain like I had cut it out with scissors, and felt like a fool for wanting to kneel and listen. The house did not feel like a house. It felt launched, not built, as if all its nail heads were tiny boats headed for one mouth. By the third night the river fell and rose and fell again, and people came to the locked gate anyway, because you cannot tell folks to ignore a place where the wall between their stories and ours has gone thin. I told Mendez I was checking ropes and went alone. Rituals matter. I touched my hat to the cross, stepped in, let the frogs stop. The water stroked stones with a noise like pages turning. Begin, it suggested. I did the names again, slower. Old ones, new ones, the ones with dates too close together. The river answered for them or did not. When I said my own name the second time, the water did not say present. It waited. It wanted me to say here. I did not. Somewhere to my left, a lid thumped a slow, disagreeing beat. Somewhere behind me, a chain spelled almost. I do not know if what waded in from the fog was a man or the shape of the idea of one. I know I raised my light and saw only my own hand lit up like a museum piece while the rest of the night stayed night. I know I began to understand the word unfinished the way Birch had meant it. Something in that water felt like a roll call that had been going on a very long time and had noticed a gap in its list. I backed to the gate. The lullaby rose behind me like a tide. I did not run. I drove home at a legal speed like obeying laws could keep the world from breaking. I sat at my kitchen table with the cassette and the coffee and the slow syllables rising in the pipes and decided not to call anyone, because saying it out loud would make me the kind of man people invite out for drinks once and then do not again. People want endings. The river has only changes in level. The county brought in fill. Men tamped it with flat feet. Mrs. Pennington put coffee cans full of flowers and tied ribbons that snapped in sun. On good days, the graveyard looks like a place where you could have a quiet thought and then leave without it following you home. On bad days, you can hear the ditches singing 3 streets over and the dogs lift their heads and do not bark. I still have the cassette. The label swelled and blurred until the tidy blue letters looked like reeds, but the tape plays. Sometimes the choir breaks off like a submerged listener wants to hear if you are paying attention. Once, between songs, a man asks, clear as a bell underwater, "Are we done?" Another voice, higher and patient, answers, "No, not yet." When it rains now, the gutters learn words. The refrigerator hum changes key. The bathtub waits. If I drive past the field where the river once left a buck decorated with weeds, I hear a thin chorus traveling in the drainage like school kids doing attendance in the hall. It is not an invitation so much as a habit the county taught the weather. Call the names, wait, mark the book. I have not gone back since that third night. That sounds like sense. It feels like skipping class. There is a seat with my name on it somewhere by the iron fence or by Mother, or in the low corner where the boxes bob like boats trying not to notice one another. When the weather turns and the ground swells and glistens like a heart, I stand in my kitchen and listen to the pipes and tell myself I will not answer. Then the house tilts subtle as a nod and the drain shapes my name. I do not mean to speak, but I do. Present, I say. The hiss from the cassette is a kind of company, and the hymn comes back wrong and right at once. And I think of a girl's hand paused at daylight, of Birch laughing until he was not, of Doyle's hat drifting like an agreement you wish you had not signed. I lock the door, though doors do not matter to water. I turn the tape. I let it sing. I listen for the part where the choir breaks and waits. It always comes, a hush like a held note, as if the river is listening through my kitchen walls. I turn the phone face down and watch the glass of water by the sink quiver, though the house is still. Tonight the clouds are building again out west, purple-bellied and bright-edged. The pump at the flat is quiet. I wash a plate and the dishwater stands a second in the bowl and then goes, like a person who suddenly remembers where they are supposed to be. The cassette finishes side A. I do not flip it. It clicks anyway and begins side B. When the first drops hit the porch, the boards answer like old knees. The jar shows its horizon. The drain clears its throat. A small sound rises under the house, threads the nails, walks the joists, and comes up through the floor between my boots. Begin, it suggests, gentle as rain starting on a tin roof. I place my palm on the table to steady myself and feel it tremble the way a dog does in thunder. I do not go to the door. I sit with the tape and the room and the river, and I hold very still. If you want an ending, borrow this until the water asks for it back. The flood fell. The grave settled. Flowers went into coffee cans. But some nights the current keeps a light on under the county, and the town hums to itself in a key I recognize. On those nights when the house floats just a little and the cupboard glasses kiss, the river calls the names, and in the quiet between drop and drop, it leaves a space open for mine. Present, I say, and the room tilts, and the hymn comes from the drain, and the river, satisfied for now, turns its page, and I hear the next line gathering in the pipes, patient as a lesson that will not be skipped, steady as a hand pressing against a lid and waiting for daylight. I pulled over to fix a coffee lid, not to chase ghosts. The thermos had developed a stubborn cross thread, and every bump between Blanco and Johnson City flung a brown comet onto my shirt. I drive panes and mirrors for a glass shop, sun-up deliveries, no motel on the boss's dime. So the plan was to catnap later in the cab at a truck stop outside Fredericksburg. But the road up there turns black and lonely after midnight, and when the live oaks thin out, you can see the chalky ribs of limestone cut out of the hills like bones. The pullout at the top of Stonewall Hill showed up like a kindness. I took it, eased the truck up beside a waist-high wall built from squared limestone blocks, and killed the engine. Everyone in town calls the place a cemetery, though most of what people remember is the wall and the wind. There used to be a church crowding the ridge, a white box with a bell and a rope and hymns that floated down to the peach orchards. Time made a meal of it. Fire did the dishes. All that's left inside the wall are old markers tilting like loose teeth and a few cedar roots clutching pale stones. In daylight, it's quiet and almost pretty. At night, the hill sounds hollow as if there's a bottle buried under it and the wind keeps blowing across its mouth. I killed the engine and the world went honest. Tick of cooling metal. Insects sparking their private morse, wind brushing cedar. I unscrewed the lid, wiped the threads, tried again. The lid caught true. I leaned on the wall, satisfied in the small way you get when an ordinary thing works the way it should. That was when I heard the first note. At first it seemed like the wire whine you get from an old fence post, except there's no fence up there, only the wall. The sound hung in the air like a string stretched taut between two invisible fingers. It grew fuller as if breath found it, and then a second voice slid under the first and another. I stood up straight. It was singing, thin at the edges but unmistakably a choir, the way a distant train is still a train even when the cars are only hints of light. I've never been much for church since my folks split. Still, I can find a harmony if the key is kind. I felt my chest answer without asking me. A bit of hum rose in my throat, the old muscle memory of singing soft so nobody turns to look. I swallowed it down. The wind paused like the hill was holding its breath with me. Then the voices swelled together. Not words yet, just shape. The steady climb. And fall that tells you the choir knows each other well enough to breathe as one people. Talk about Stonewall Hill. They say if you stop on a certain night, you'll hear hymns from a church that isn't there. I always filed that next to deer that scream like women, and the white dress hitchhiker who vanishes at the Johnson City light. But the voices didn't behave like a teenager's prank. They were old, worn smooth like a favorite step, layered with a patience I felt in my bones. I called out very funny and listened for a snicker. The only answer was a chord so clean it made my eyes sting. It wasn't any hymn I knew. It had the walk of the old ones, 4 beats, no hurry, the kind my grandmother used to tap on her knee. But the melody slipped into places the Baptist book never went. Vowels rounded. Consonants softened until they were mostly breaths. A man's voice led, warm and frayed, the way a rope looks right before it breaks and somehow never does. When he rose a step, the others rose with him like grain moving under wind. A sedan came around the bend below, headlights brushing the wall, and I flinched like a kid caught singing along to the radio. The taillights faded and the cord held. Somewhere in the dark, a dog barked once and decided better. The choir inhaled together. Without thinking, I did too. A stupid thing. I should have gotten back in the truck and let the engine drown it. Instead, I set my thermos on the wall, swung my legs over and climbed into the cemetery. The ground inside was all brittle stems and limestone chips, 1,000 teeth under a thin lip of dirt. The stones were an unruly collection. One marble angel weathered down to a kind blur, a row of homemade markers lettered with a nail, an iron cross that had lost one arm to rust and leaned like it wanted a friend to lean on. The voices drew me uphill to a flat patch where cedar roots knuckled through the soil. In the middle sat a slab without a name. Rain had cut a narrow path down its face, the way a tear cuts a cheek and keeps going. I laid my palm on the stone because the music told me to. Not in words, in a kind of permission that arrived under the sternum. The slab was cold and then very slightly warm, like it remembered a day. I didn't see anyone. No robes, no floating shapes, nothing a camera could prove. But every space around me felt occupied. Breaths where there were no bodies. The quiet pressure of people standing in rows. A faint smell of old wood polish and damp wool, as if pews had been set in the open air and refused to rot. The melody tipped toward speech. But if there were lyrics, they weren't in any language I knew. The syllables were made of air. They meant more than they said. My mouth formed them anyway, the way a hand reaches for a railing in a dark staircase and finds one in the exact place you hoped. I started to hum so I wouldn't do more. The hum turned to a line. The line left my mouth and was caught so neatly by the choir that I went cold. They had made a space for me without a seam. Footsteps scraped behind me. I turned, ready to be mad at kids with a Bluetooth speaker, and saw 2 people climb the wall. A boy and a girl, barely 20, hoodie and ponytail. The clumsy grace of people who just drove for the first time without checking with anybody. They didn't look at me. They looked past toward the invisible rows. The girl smiled the way you smile at a song you've loved so long you forgot you knew it. The boy's lips moved with a hum that wasn't his. They walked by as if I were a fence post. "Hey," I said, louder than I meant. The sound wobbled in the cord. "You hear that?" They both nodded once. It was the kind of nod you give a preacher from habit. "You should," I began and ran out of grammar. "Leave? Stay? Pray?" The choir swelled. The girl's shoes left the ground a breath and settled again without her knees bending. A tiny coin of fog hung in front of her mouth longer than breath should hang, and then folded into the music like a trick. The boy reached with open fingers, as if he were taking a number at a deli. His hand came back empty. He seemed satisfied anyway. I had a cold idea that if I knew his name it would be different now. Worn at the edges by a song, the choir dipped into phrases that felt like names not first and last, but the private names you keep for time and place. The shade in your grandmother's kitchen at noon. The sound a certain screen door makes, the gravel lot where you kissed somebody and didn't tell. Each phrase clicked onto a person and held. The girl straightened when hers found home. The boy breathed the way men breathe when someone puts a blanket over their knees. I stepped between them and the nameless stone and put my hands up. It was an old reflex from helping my nephew cross streets. "Enough," I said. I didn't expect to be heard. The music hesitated the way a long train hesitates when a coin flattens under one wheel. It didn't stop. It adjusted around me. That adjustment made me sicker than any threat would have. "What is this?" the boy asked, his voice thin with wonder. His mouth kept a hum in the corner like he was holding a toothpick there. "Church," the girl said, with the sleepy certainty of a child waking up in a moving car and recognizing the streetlights. "It's late," I said. "You shouldn't be here." It sounded silly even as I said it. I was there too. The lead voice, the warm rope of it, came closer without moving. Not stern, patient. An offer more than a command. "Come inside. Be warm, put your weight somewhere." The words didn't travel through my ears. They arrived ready in my mouth like a taste you remember. I felt the exact hollow that voice could fill. I have carried my share of hollows. Most folks do. Their shapes are private. This one seemed molded to mine. "Don't," I told myself, small and mean. My heel slid on a cedar root and I dropped to a knee. My hand struck the slab. A ring of heat flared, a circle the size of a bell's base, and was gone. For a blink I smelled burnt rope and rain. "Names," I said, catching at the oldest rope I had. "What are your names?" They told me. I repeated them back. The choir made room for the exchange like polite people step aside in a hallway. In that space I felt cold, the kind that lives in old houses in the daytime and won't leave. It was the shape of someone missing. The hill counted different. The markers didn't add up. The voices softened to a hum that would have been easy to lean against forever. Below us, a semi downshifted, its tired groan sliding neatly into the harmony for a second like it had planned to. The moon slipped behind a smear of cloud and turned the world a little lost. I talked fast, the way you do when you're trying to keep a drunk friend from making a decision that won't unmake. "Come back another time," I told the kids. "Bring half the town if you want. But tonight, go." A voice slid out of the cord and spoke next to my ear. "We are short by 4, it said, apologetic as a choir director with a thin tenor section. "You will do." I spun, but wind was the only body there. The wind didn't speak. Something did. I did the dumbest brave thing I could think of. I sang the wrong song. First thought, best thought. A ballpark standby from when I was 9 and my dad took me to watch the missions, sun and dust, and a paper cup of Pepsi sweating down my arm. I sang on the offbeat, off-key, and I clapped. The sound crashed into their harmony like a wrench in a machine. The choir recoiled, kindly but definitely. The girl blinked like someone had opened a shade. The boy's grip on my sleeve loosened. I clanged harder, worse, and backed us down the slope. The nameless stone cooled under my palm. Breath coins the choir had hung in the air shattered and spun away. The wind came back like somebody had remembered to open a window. "Run," I said between lines, and we did. We scrambled over the wall in a tangle of elbows and denim and panic. On the highway side, my hands stung with limestone grit. We lunged for my truck. The key found the slot like a practiced answer. The engine coughed alive. The radio filled the cab with a thin country ballad. Compared to what we left, it sounded human in a way that hurt. We drove without talking until the first yellow diner lights. At the stop with the neon fork and knife, I asked their names again. They said them. I said them back like pinning tags onto coats in a busy room. I asked where they lived. They told me. They didn't want a ride. The boy paused with the door open, eyes bright from whatever had almost been. Do you think it would have hurt? He asked. It was almost a whisper. Yes, I said, because I had to pick a side and because if it didn't hurt, nobody would ever leave. I slept in the cab in that lot with my hat over my eyes. I dreamed of rope sliding in a pulley and a bell ringing softly, the way you ring to gather but not to alarm. Morning knocked all the edges off. The coffee stain on my shirt dried into a crescent. I made my delivery late and took the chewing out. It felt like someone else's mouth said sorry for me and mine echoed it. A week later, curiosity stuffed my steering wheel hand and turned it. I took the hill in daylight. The wall was small and workmanlike. The names on the stones were ordinary and kind. The slab in the crown was as blank as it had been, except someone had set a mint tin on it. I climbed over to pick up the trash. Inside the tin, a scrap of paper lay folded twice. On it, someone had drawn 4 measures of melody with no clef and no key. The notes were the choreography of a breath I knew. I set the tin back. You shouldn't take home what belongs to a place. Since then, I keep rules. Don't stop up there after dark. When the wind turns metallic and the air tastes like pennies, turn the radio up. If a stray harmony threads the static, sing something ugly to break it. Say your name out loud once, then again in the voice you used when you were 10. Names help. Doors like names. Sometimes the rules hold. Sometimes I catch myself humming in the produce aisle and have to bite the inside of my cheek. Once, looking into the diner's refrigerated case, I saw the glass fog and a round coin in front of my mouth when the room was not cold. I didn't open the case. I went outside and stood with my face in the hot wind until the fog memory burned off. I haven't seen the kids again. I think about them when certain songs show up in commercials, harmless 3-chord things that crack open a private attic. Maybe they moved. Maybe they go to the wall and put the lid back on their mouths the way I try to. The hill is patient. Peach trees don't hurry the spring. Neither does a choir that learned how to wait by singing the same line for 100 years. If you drive that stretch late, you'll pass the pullout without seeing it. It hides until you need it. The wall will be there, limestone blocks dry as old bread, the cedar shedding their waxy smell, the wind speaking in the hollow tone that makes your own head respond. If you climb over, they won't drag you. They don't have to. They will lean the shape of the song into the hollow you keep hidden, and you will feel for 1 true second perfectly made to fit. On good days, I whistle off key when I crest the hill. On bad days, I take the longer river road where tires collect powdery dust that tastes like wheat and keeps my mouth busy. On the worst nights, I don't trust my voice at all. I sit on the porch and listen to the easy hymns of ordinary life. The air unit cycling on, a neighbor's screen door slapping, a siren far off losing interest, and I call those my choir. It usually works, but every now and then the wind shifts and brings that clean, cold smell of cedar and old iron, and I feel my mouth begin to shape a round syllable that isn't a word, but might as well be the name I give to myself when nobody's around. It feels like a key turning in a familiar lock. I close my lips and count to 10. I say my name. I say the names of people I love. The wind waits. The hill waits. The choir doesn't chase. It just offers, again and again, the exact thing you most want to belong to. I don't have a tidy ending for you. The church is still gone. The bell is still missing. The wall still holds. Somewhere up there is a stone that doesn't bother with names. You can stand by it and lay your palm on the cool face and feel a warmth rise like breath under skin. If you stay, you will learn the tune. If you leave, you will hum it anyway. Either way, when the highway empties and the night grows bottle hollow, you'll hear the invitation float over limestone like it's water. Not a threat, not a shout, just a gentle, tireless welcome. I put my truck in gear when I hear it. I keep my mouth closed. I let the radio play something dumb and human until the hill is small in my rear view, and the song is only wind again. I didn't start walking the cemetery for any romantic reason. My doctor told me to move more, and my knees told me the track at the high school was cruel. The cemetery behind the old schoolhouse was quiet, flat, shaded by mesquite and live oak. I could make a loop before supper, then go home to my little kitchen with its mismatched mugs and class photos that don't belong to anyone living anymore. Once those photos meant I was someone. Now they're proof I used to be busy. On the worst afternoons when the heat laid over town like a wet blanket and even the strays refused to bark, I still went. The iron fence ticked as it cooled. Cicadas sawed their song and the dust smelled like pennies. I walked past names I had graded in looping red pen and names I never knew. In a small Texas town, you teach someone's child long enough, and you will eventually stand over them with your hat in your hands. We don't say that out loud, but we know it. I brought clippers for the Bermuda grass that creeps like gossip. And sometimes I cleaned a stone because no one else would. The schoolhouse beside the graveyard is a bleached husk, windows boarded, bell long gone. I taught there 26 years, 5th grade mostly. I liked my classroom with its uneven floor and the smell of crayons in August. The first week I'd write all their names on index cards, round the corners with scissors so they felt good in the hand, shuffle them like a deck, and practice my roll call until my tongue knew the order better than my head. I started hearing the voices on a Tuesday that wasn't special. No omen, no dead bird at the doorstep, just heat. The sun slid behind the limestone ridge and left the sky the color of dirty dishwater. I was on my second lap counting the creak in my right knee when I heard a boy clear his throat the way they do when they want to be called on but don't want to look needy. "Here," the boy said. I stopped. A June beetle bumped my ear and staggered away. There was no one in the graveyard but me, the stones, and the weeds. The word felt small, like it had to squeeze through something to get out. I told myself it was a radio on the farm road, a TV through a screen door. Then a girl answered, a breathy present, the kind that comes from kids who are trying on seriousness like their mother's coat. "Here," a third voice said, lower, bored. Boys with too much summer still in them always sounded that way the first week back. I turned in a slow circle. Old woman, careful. The sound didn't come from the schoolhouse or town. It came from between the rows, from the stones themselves, as though the names were learning to say themselves. "Class," I heard myself say, because when the world tilts, you reach for the furniture, you know. Voices carry. Inside voices, no one laughed. The cicadas sawed. I went home on shaking legs and told myself I had been lightheaded. Low blood sugar can make you hear your past like a radio in another room. I ate chicken salad in front of the fan and didn't turn on the television. I told myself I wouldn't go back the next day. I have never been good at lying to myself. On Wednesday, the wind came up late and pushed the heat around like a bully. I took the long shears in case the grounds crew had missed the corner where the Johnson grass grew, like it had a grudge. For a lap and a half, the only sounds were the hinges in my body and the paper hiss of dry weeds. Then as I passed the Alvarez family plot, someone said, "Alvarez, Donna." A pause. "Expectant, here," I whispered before I could help myself, because that's what you do when your name is called. And the person who calls it loves you enough to remember. I pressed my lips closed. No one had called me Ms. Alvarez since I retired, and the way the voice said Donna was the way kids say a first name when you let them as a treat. The next name was Baker Luan. I had 3 Luans in 26 years and only one who spelled it like that. She died in a rollover out past the county line. The voice that said her name had the same round R's she'd had when she was 10, and chip-toothed and always forgetting her lunch. It didn't go in order. Names came like doves flushed from brush. 1, then 3, then none at all for half a lap. The voices were the age they'd been in my room, not the age they'd grown into out there. If I know you, and I mean truly know you, I can still hear the way you sounded at 11. It's a kind of curse they don't warn you about in teacher training. At the old faculty picnic table under the mesquite, I heard a girl I didn't recognize, light as paper. "Present," she echoed herself, fainter. I went to the table and brushed dust off the bench and sat, though I don't sit in that place usually. The voices went on naming themselves, and I put a hand on the wood the way you touch a sleeping child's back to prove the rise and fall is real. The third night, I brought my index cards because I am stubborn in unflattering ways. If the dead wanted attendance, who was I to deny them? I flipped through and read names into the wind, trying to match the voices to the years. Garcia, Ben. He was the one who drew trucks in the margins and cried on a field trip to the Natural Bridge because the bats felt like God. Present, Ben said very softly. Henderson, Cal. He of the loud pencil and the skinned knees. Here. Ibarra, Kelly. Present. Some didn't answer, and the not answer felt like a posture. Heads down, eyes on the desk, more than absence. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That the cemetery had gone back to school and I was the only teacher left? Around here, we keep our private strangenesses, but my feet learned the path in a way that felt like duty. The sky got tired sooner. I wore a little headlamp that made moths look like ash when they darted through the beam. I learned where the ground gives a little underfoot, the sunken places that aren't polite to talk about. If the cemetery had a pattern, I never found it. Some nights the roll call came strong, a river of names that bent time. Other nights only one name said twice, like whoever was calling had given up on the rest. And then came the night the voices called mine. I had paused to rub a knot in my calf. The air was still enough to make a person superstitious. Far off, a pump jack nodded. I heard as plain as my own door shutting, "Alvarez, Donna." Everything went out of my head at once, like when the power drops and the refrigerator stutters, and you realize it has been speaking to you all along. My name did not fit in that place. Teachers stand at the front. Teachers call. They are not called, not by the role that matters. I had a child's urge to refuse. The cicadas quit. The wind lay down. Whoever was holding the list waited with a patience I had taught. I pictured my classroom with the crooked clock and the poster about commas that made a joke about cows, and I did what I have always done. I showed up. "Here," I said, and the sound of it scared me more than anything that had happened since my husband died. Because saying here is admitting that we are counted. The voices fell quiet. The quiet had a body to it, like a sleeping dog in your lap. I stood there with the dumb headlamp haloing moths and waited for whatever came next. 5 seconds, 10, a minute. The air filled itself with night insects again, with the faraway rattle of a truck bed with a laugh from somewhere in town. Nothing else. The roll call had ended. For now, I went home with my heart beating like a bird in a culvert. I laid the index cards out in rows the way other people lay out tarot. I thought about the absent slip I kept for the boy whose mother never signed anything on time. I thought about the office lady who'd buzz the room and say in her clock-watching voice, "Please mark your attendance." I slept in my chair and dreamed of desks turned toward me like mouths. In the morning, the town pretended nothing happens. Lawnmowers complained. Somebody burned something sweet. At the grocery store, Carl asked if I wanted my usual, and I said yes, because rituals keep a person upright. I nearly told him what had happened. I didn't. I waited until evening like a person waits for test results. When I reached the gate, there was a paper taped to the metal with blue painter's tape. It flapped once, then lay flat. It was a copy of a class list from the early 90s, mimeograph lines faint and purple. My name at the top. 28 names below in my careful hand. If the wind had torn it down and scooted it along the road, I might have believed I had left it in a box. But the tape was too neat, too new. You will say I should have turned around. But loneliness can make courage look like obedience. I walked the first lap. At the little cedar near the north fence, the roll call began again. Anderson, Pete. Here. Baker, Luann. Present. When the list reached the boy whose mother never signed a thing, I said his name softly and he answered the way he used to, proud to be caught doing right. Midway through the second lap, the air changed. The smell that wasn't there before was there now. Chalk, pencil shaving, pink eraser rubbed too hard. "Alvarez, Donna," the voice said. I felt every year on my back. "Here," I said, because I have never skipped class. From far down among the stones, the bell rang. A thin, sweet note, as if someone had hung a smaller bell inside the earth and only used it for after school. I would like to tell you I was brave. I stayed because my knees wouldn't let me run. The names began again, not students this time, but teachers. Mr. Dennis with the tie covered in punnyfish. Miss Olga from the library who kept butterscotch in her desk. Coach Martinez who let them sleep during the movie on rainy days. They answered in the voices they'd had when I met them, younger than me now, and the answers overlapped until it sounded like rain on tin. "Present," I said, and what came up from the ground was not a hand or a ghost. It was a memory so solid I could smell it. Rainy day cafeteria, hot dog steam, floor wax. On the table in front of me sat my grade book, the old green kind with the tiny squares that turn a person into a row of numbers. The pages turned. The column for attendance was a neat line of checks. Beside my name, in my own hand, a blank. The night after that, I did not go. I made myself sit on the couch and knit an ugly scarf. The television said nothing I could use. At 9, I stood at the sink and knew I would go, and I hated myself just enough to feel alive. The wind had swung south. It carried the river and the feedlot and something like old books. Inside, the roll call was already underway. The voice had learned to take its time. It called names from classes I hadn't taught, names from before I was hired. The way small towns braid the living and the dead without ceremony. Near the crumbling schoolhouse, I put my palm on the painted brick. The heat had gone out of it. The town had no money for demolition, so the building sank year by year into its own shadow. The bell rang again, and from the children's section by the fence came the sound of pages turning. When my name came, I gave it because I always will. The roll call stopped. The hush that followed was like the pause before a principal speaks your name over the intercom. Then a whisper very close to my ear said, "Mark yourself absent and we'll come get you." I turned so fast my headlamp swung and lit the fence and the dust and nothing else. "Who?" I asked. "Those who skipped," it breathed. "Those who didn't say here when it mattered." There was no threat in the voice. If anything, there was relief. The way a child sounds when the consequence at last makes sense. I walked home slow. The moon hauled itself over the ridge and turned the scrub silver. On my table, I set the class list and put the salt shaker on top of it because my hands needed something ordinary. I fell asleep with my cheek on the paper and dreamed of a blacktop shining like a river after rain. The last night was cooler. A north wind had shaved the day clean and the grass made a friendly sound as if it remembered how to breathe. The painter's tape at the gate had gone brittle and let go. The list lay on the path with 2 boot prints across it, mine and someone else's. I folded it and put it in my pocket. If there was to be a test, I would not let them grade me in the open. Halfway through my first lap, I heard a song. Not church and not radio. It was the song of a classroom when everyone is copying a sentence they think is too long. The scrape, the sigh, the soft laugh that escapes like a secret. It moved through the stones the way wind moves through wheat. The bell rang once and made the hairs rise on my forearms. A voice I knew, the boy who cried at bats, said, as if we were picking up a conversation from long ago, "You said a name is a kind of seeing." "I did," I said. "You said if you say it, you see us." "I still do," I said, and the truth of it made my eyes wet. "I see you clearer than I see myself some days." "Then mark yourself," the whisper at my ear said, kinder now. "So we can see you too." I took out the folded list. The column beside my name was still empty. My pencil shook, but my hand knew what to do. The old muscle memory bloomed. That teacher's script you can write upside down and backward on the overhead. I hovered. The wind chose that moment to puzzle the weeds, to comb the oaks. Far out on the highway, a truck laid on its horn and made the night jump. In the pause that followed, a sound came like knuckles rapping the top of my desk. I put the pencil down. "Here," I said for the last time and tore the page neatly where my name sat. The sound was loud enough to bring bats out of whatever crack they were hiding in. The list in my hand had a new edge. The list on the ground had a blank. The voices didn't wail. They exhaled, the way children do when the bell finally frees them. For a moment, the night was full of the strange sweetness of chalk and hot dogs and floor wax and rain on a flat roof. Then it was just crickets and the little clank of the gate sign when the breeze moved through. I went home with the torn piece in my pocket and made tea I didn't drink. Fear sat with me like an old colleague who retired badly and wants to talk about nothing. The paper warmed to my leg. I thought not kindly of absent kids who lied and the men who wanted the numbers to look right so that money would move on a page. I thought of the way we mark people and the way the world marks us back. I still walk at dusk. Some evenings I hear the roll call begin, and some evenings I don't. When the voices do come, they do not call me. They call the ones I taught and the ones who taught me. I say nothing and keep my pace. Every now and then a whisper at my ear asks if I'm ready to be seen. I let the question hang in the dust like a sentence we're all copying together. Too long by half, but somehow right. And when I pass the children's section and the thin bell rings once, I pause. Just long enough to wonder whether attendance is over, or whether I've simply been marked in a different book. I was the one they called when the cemetery fence started to bleed rust. That's not a thing you print in the church bulletin. Saturday picnic, also the graveyard is leaking. But news moves quick in a town where you can recognize a man by how his truck sounds. I'm Nate Monroe. I fix gates, weld hinges, straighten bent posts after a storm or a Saturday night. Metal makes sense to me. You heat it, you convince it. It remembers, but it forgives. St. Anselm sits on a low rise cut out of corn and barbed wire. 12 panels of iron spears and 2 gates, the kind with a sunburst in the middle that looks hopeful in daylight and like teeth at night. My granddad helped set the fence in the 60s. He said the pastor then insisted on iron, not chain link. A Christian needs his boundaries to have weight, the man had told him. Granddad laughed when he told me that. The fence has held weddings outside and funerals in, and most years it's just a landmark the wind leans against. This July, the heat pounded the fields until the rows of corn went knife-edged. You could smell dust even before the combine started. Flies moved like punctuation. When the call came from Pastor Whitlow, "Nate, we've got a problem at St. A's." I drove up with the acetylene rig and the kind of optimism you bring to slow emergencies. The air above the graveyard shivered like a sheet on a clothesline. Rust lapped the rails in wet tongues. When I touched one spear, orange powder stained my palm the way tobacco does the lip of a jar. "You ever see metal go this fast?" Whitlow asked. He's broad in the shoulders and careful in his eyes, a man who talks about grace like it's a rope you swing on. "Only when salt gets at it," I said. "Or when something wants through." I meant water or air. He kept looking at the gate. "People say they heard voices last night," he said. "Circling. You know how folks get?" "How folks get is they talk." I tapped the rail with my knuckle. "I'll grind it back to clean and seal it." I spent the afternoon with sparks running like minnows. The fence sounded solid under the grinder. The good bell-like ring you get when the metal still believes in itself. I put in fresh rods where the spears had thinned, brushed on a zinc primer that promised a miracle in 3 coats, and told the pastor not to post pictures of me like a fireworks show. Each time I killed the torch, I could hear something like a radio left on low in another room. Not words I knew, syllables braided into a rope and pulled tight around the hill. I told myself it was the wind working the corn into a whisper, and left before the sun turned red. That night, my wife Claire rolled toward me in the heat and said, half asleep, "Your breath tastes like pennies," and then, "Stranger, don't bring that home. We don't spook easy." We both grew up with cicadas sawing the air and coyotes stitching fields together. Still, I lay awake and listened to the town reach its quiet. And when the quiet arrived, I heard, as if the hill had cupped its hands to my window, a mutter that moved without feet. I told myself new paint stinks. That's all. In the morning, Miss Dot at the diner slid me coffee and said, like it was the weather, "That old Mr. Spivey heard folks talking all along the fence line at 2 a.m. Not English, not Spanish. At the feed store, May Hutchins said the pastor had started locking the chapel before sunset. Says the fence keeps something in, not out," she told me, eyebrows up like birds. I laughed because you laugh. On day 2, I finished the run of panels and added cross bracing where the posts met the earth. Heat rose off the graves thick as breath. Whitlow stood beside me, shading his eyes. "Children's section is over there," he said, pointing to a cluster of lamb-topped stones. "Sometimes the singing starts there." He took a breath. "Last night I heard my father say my name. I hear my mother when I say the word hush," I said. "It doesn't have to be a haunting. Don't let it touch you, Nate." He said it like he meant the iron. By dusk, the fence looked sober and new, as if it had slept something off. I loaded the rig. The wind shifted and a line of sound rolled over the hill like a rope catching. I felt the inside of my elbow itch the way it does before a needle. My name was in there again, folded wrong. I went home and pretended not to carry it. The rust returned overnight, blistering under the paint like a rash. That morning, a boy cut through the graveyard to meet his girlfriend at the irrigation ditch. He texted her a picture of his hand on a spear, like he was about to climb a playground ladder, and then nothing. They found him at dawn sitting inside the fence with his knees pulled up like a cannonball, mouth packed full of dirt. He said he'd heard his mother pray from the far side of the yard and climbed over to tell her to stop. His mother's alive. She drove up in her robe and grabbed his cheeks in both hands and said, "Don't you ever answer a voice that knows your name from a place that doesn't." By afternoon, the story had gotten thin and sharp on the internet. At the chapel steps, Whitlow said, "We maintain the boundary and we pray without his tie on," which told me how rattled he was. I checked the welds. Perfect. The rails left red on my fingers anyway, as if the metal had decided to sweat. That evening, I went back with my headlamp, because a job that gets under your skin becomes the only thing your skin wants to touch. When I cut the torch, the night sat down on the hill heavy and pleased with itself. The mutter came back around, not exactly louder, closer. The way a fly is louder when it keeps finding your ear. I drove home with the windows down, and the sound stayed with me like the smell of welding does. In your hair and your shirt and the crease of your elbow. Claire watched me butter bread like it was a delicate task and said, "You're somewhere else." Later, she slept with her hand on my chest and every so often whispered something that had my name's shape and someone else's temperature. On the third night, a storm shouldered up from the south and stood over St. A's. Like a man at a door, lightning gave the corn silver bones. I'd promised Whitlow I'd keep an eye on the gate until midnight. He sat in the bed of my truck with a flashlight like a shepherd's rod. Boys in dark trucks idled down the lane with their lights off, and that loud, empty laughter men use when they don't want to hear themselves think. One sprinted up, grabbed the chain on the gate, and tossed it into the grass. The padlock thudded like a coin. "Back it up," Whitlow called, voice gentled by 100 graveside prayers. Someone threw a beer can and it hit the fence with a tinny applause. The sprinter pulled again and the gate gave a miserable lurch. Lightning struck the far panel and the fence sang the cleanest, wrongest note I've ever heard. The boy fell flat and laughed. The laugh kept going in a voice that belonged to the storm. He ran and the laugh ran after him. We heaved the gate shut and I crisscrossed it with the heavy chain I use for hauling tractors. Rain moved on. The mutter thinned to pacing again. Whitlow put his forehead to the rail and said, "Still in." He didn't look like a victor. He looked like a man who had delayed a bill. Morning made it sensible for 3 hours. Then the rust began to come off the fence in curls that lay in the grass like iron hair. I found a flake inside my toolbox, though the lid was latched. When I pinched it, it smeared my fingers red-brown like old blood. Something wasn't chewing the fence so much as leaning through it. I pressed my ear to a post and heard Claire humming a tune I'd only heard at the hill. I was not at home. That afternoon, Claire came with me. She stood in the heat with her hair stuck to her neck and said, "It's like the fence is sweating grief." We sat in the truck with the windows down because the AC had chosen death. "It feels like the whole town is waiting for the wrong person to do the wrong thing," she said softly. I was about to tell her no one would when the wrong person did. It's always a boy with more fear than sense, or a man who's lost something and wants to throw something else away in exchange. Sometime before dawn on the 4th day, one spear on the east side rusted through at the base and laid down as gentle as a sleeping child. When it fell, the voices stopped. Not faded, stopped the way a room goes quiet when a teacher walks in. I braced my hands on my knees from the sudden lightness of the air. Whitlow walked out of the chapel with his palms open. If they wanted out, I said before I knew I was talking, they could have come through a dozen other ways. "Not out," he said. "Through." We patched the gap with a square of plywood painted black because there wasn't time to forge a new bar. Folks came to stare. They put hands on kids' shoulders and smiled for pictures because that's what people do when they're frightened and holding a phone. "Nothing," someone said. "Hear that?" Nothing, and it was true. The hill had the sound of an unplugged machine. That night we slept like we'd been forgiven. The quiet didn't stay empty. It filled up with us. A week later, May's husband took my elbow after church and said, embarrassed, that May had started speaking long strings of something in her sleep, and the dog lay down in the hall as if it had been sung to. People began to hum at the grocery store without noticing. You would think of the hill and your mouth would shape a word it didn't own. Deke wrote up a report on trespassers and then found he'd written names that weren't in his handwriting at the bottom. He tore it up, but the names stayed in his head like dandelion fluff. At home, Claire woke at 3 and stood at the kitchen window, humming that rope of notes while the icebox motor twitched. "Keep us," she whispered once, and I wanted to build a fence around her breath. I wanted a fence around the town's mouths. Instead, I set my palm between her shoulders and felt a vibration there, like the feel of iron when a train goes by miles away. She leaned back into my hand as if I were the rail. We tried a second patch, real iron this time. I ground and welded, and the sparks made a swarm that rose and vanished. When I set the bead, the metal felt fidgety like a horse that doesn't want a saddle. The moment I cooled it, the mutter started again, thin like a radio starting to catch a distant station, and then dropped out as if a finger touched a switch. "Through," Whitlow said again, quiet. "Not gone. You can live with a lot if you all agree to pretend at the same speed." People stopped saying the word haunting. They said tired instead. They said the heat could make a person talk in their sleep. Miss Dot went back to seating folks by the window. At the VFW, a man told a story about his first tractor. And in the middle of it, he said a sentence that wasn't English and frowned and said, "Anyway," and everyone nodded like that was a normal detour. We're good at nodding. A month later, we had our first funeral since the gap. Old Man Walker had been ready to go. We carried him up the lane as if he were a sleeping child. The black square looked cheap in daylight. For a moment, as the pallbearers paused at the gate, I felt the old loop of voices turn in the air like a wind laid down and then, instead of catching on the fence, fold into our lungs. The service went like services go. Dirt made its old sound on the casket lid. The corn leaned, listening. On the way back down, the pastor walked beside me and said, not looking, I found a note in the church log from the 60s. Fence consecrated to confine a trouble come down off the ridge. He wrote that the trouble doesn't want out. It wants company. Company finds a way, I said, even when the door stays shut. That night, Claire dreamed with her eyes open. I knew because the whites showed and she spoke word by word like a man pulling a rope hand over hand. I recognized a name and didn't. My own mouth moved to meet hers. It felt like kissing a mirror. In the morning, she didn't remember, and I told her a version of the truth that had fewer edges. The town learned to carry it. A teacher called roll and once added a name no one had, and for a second all the kids raised their hands by reflex and then laughed too loud. The crossing guard by the school hummed a tune that made a toddler stare and blink and then hum it back. We have less graffiti on the stop sign now. People don't linger at the hill. We pretend we don't hear each other when the wrong word pops out. It's easier that way. It has the feel of manners. Sometimes I drive up and sit with the engine off and my hands on the wheel the way you do when you don't trust your hands. The plywood is still there, though weather is taking it. Behind it, the square of air over the gap looks ordinary. When the breeze comes up through the corn, it moves across that square and becomes the same breeze on the other side. Every now and then, when I am careful to be nothing and no one, I hear the old pacing begin again, soft, patient, and then a sound like a person putting their mouth to the opening from the inside and tasting the air. It's not speech. It's a rehearsal for speech. It's a breath practicing the shape of a name, remembering the weight of iron and how light a tongue is. If you want me to tell you what the fence keeps, I'll say this. Once it kept a trouble in one place. Now the place is us. The hill is quiet because it learned our names. At night, when Claire breathes against my neck, sometimes her breath makes the syllables the fence used to make. The sound is gentle. It is so gentle you could mistake it for love. I lie awake and let it pass through me, and I picture iron going red in slow air, and I smell pennies and cut corn, and I wait for the moment when the breath on my skin is not hers or mine, but ours. Something borrowed and returned. And I understand that there are fences you can mend and fences that mend you to the thing you're keeping. When it comes, I'll know. I will not need a fence to tell me. I used to say panhandle nights were empty. It's easier that way. Empty means the wind is only wind, and a fence ticking as it cools is only metal, and the headstones in the ditch light of your truck don't list toward you like listeners. So when my sister asked me to give her son something real before he left for college, I took Eli out to the county graveyard west of Amarillo and told him the dead don't mind and the living don't bother. We pitched our bags on the public side of the fence, near a patch of mesquite that had lost the argument with drought, and let the heat of the day soak out of the ground into our backs. We weren't chasing thrills. The motels were full with fairgoers, and he'd never seen a sky so crowded with stars it made your chest hurt to look. He was 18 in that crooked-limbed way boys are when they're not finished choosing their bones. He filmed a moth the size of his palm trying to bully our lantern, and then, because I asked, tucked his phone away like a good kid wanting to be brave in front of the old man who used to tell stories and then stopped. "Mom says you were good at it," he said, poking the fire with a stick. I ran out, I told him. Or maybe the stories ran out of me. He nodded toward the corner. "Branson says there's a pit out here. 7 in it, no marker. Says if you sleep near it, they talk." Branson would sell his shadow, I said, but I couldn't help looking. The corner had a listening quality, like a church after the last parishioner leaves and the room waits to hear if it is still a room. Folks told it different ways. A lynch that pretended to be justice, a railroad argument that got buried to save paperwork, a preacher whose hands were not holy, a family nobody agreed about until the ground decided for them. The facts wandered. The number stayed. 7. We banked the fire to coals and lay back. A highway hummed its patient vowel. The fence cooled, clicking small coins into the night. Around 2, when the world takes its shoes off, I felt something thin pull at the edge of hearing. Not quite sound, more like the aftertaste of a word. It divided into strands, then into more, until 7 lay over one another like threads pinched between fingers. A papery voice stepped ahead of the rest. 7th, it said. You hear what you bring, I told myself. But the woman voice that followed had anger under the prayer, too large to sit anywhere. Not him, she said. Not the boy. I stood and put my fingers on the fence. Rust gritted my fingerprints. The corner smelled of old varnish and wet wood that wasn't wet. I stepped over where the bottom rung bent toward the dirt, because a story that begins to talk at you is a hook you can't help but check with your thumb. The grass inside had given up on green. The ground dipped into a shallow oval, soil lighter at the rim, like a wound that healed wrong. They told me how they died without telling me who they were. A farmhand who stayed late to fix a pump, and that was why he was on the road when riders came. A tailor who slept in a church shed. A deputy whose brother drank mean. A woman who kept stopping to describe the feel of her daughter's scalp under her fingers, as if that were the whole of it. A boy who laughed at everything and shouldn't have. The details kept unthreading as soon as they were spoken, but the heat of them held. Beneath the talking, beneath the scrapes and stops and the stubborn need to say it right, moved the number that wanted a last piece. 7th, the papery voice said again. Not kept. Not named. Not finished. Footsteps behind me. Eli stood with his hair pushed up on one side by sleep, the way dawn tousles wheat. You were talking, he said. To who? The radio under the dirt, I said, which felt like a joke until it wasn't. He stepped over the bent rung without theater and crouched by the dip. I caught his wrist like you catch a kid at the curb, not rough. Just the kind of grab a body does when it loves what it cannot control. He didn't pull free. He just looked at me with a tired understanding we inherit in my family when we realize nobody is coming to decide for us. I can hear them, he said, like a station that almost comes in. Tell me what they're saying. He closed his eyes and listened. The ground did a thing old houses do after a storm, a small, whole-body sigh. The bowl settled a finger's width. Dry soil slid as if remembering a shape. We left the fence then. We left the corner. We kept a fire going and said ordinary things about summer and the fair and whether the coffee tasted like pennies. In the morning, we ate pancakes in a diner with cracked red vinyl and good-natured waitresses who had always been there. Eli rubbed his thumb and forefinger together like grit lived in the whirls. When I asked, he said he slept funny. When I asked again, he said nothing. We went back the next night because I couldn't bear for him to keep that place to himself. The wind came from the south and tasted like tar. We set our bags closer to the fence as if distance worked like medicine. The voices came sooner, as if we'd saved them the trouble of remembering us. They told the story again, different in the facts, the same in the heat. Men who believed a rope could be persuaded to do law's work. A girl whose English was still wrinkled from packing. A widow who would not forgive because forgiveness would have been too small a box. At the edge of it, the hollow breathed again and the dirt slid like a man adjusting in his chair. On the third night, the wind died. The grass held still, a congregation waiting for a name. We didn't light a fire. We leaned against the fence and let the starlight make liars out of distance. The voices arrived like curtains stirring in a hospital at 2 a.m. 7th, they said. Gentler now. Not a demand, but a sentence missing its last word. I put my arm across Eli's chest and said I would do it. I said the worst sentence I've ever said. Take me. The woman voice softened into pity that cut more than anger. You're already in a hole, she said. We need a clean number. Eli ducked under the rung and knelt at the oval. He had a cheap spiral notebook open on his knee, 7 names scrawled at the top, and he whispered into the ground like you talk to a sleeping dog you're not sure will wake kindly. I climbed in after him and set my hand on the back of his neck. Heat ran bright there the way fevers do when they make up their minds. He didn't pray. He inventoried the day. The moths who battered the truck's dome light. Branson's bad joke. The smell of my coffee. The feel of rust printing his palm. How the bus once smelled like vinyl and oranges. The teacher who drew a smiley on a failed quiz because the margin made her laugh. The fear that his father's leaving was not an event, but a talent he might secretly share. The catch in his mother's laugh that made you want to hold it steady with your hand. He paid an ordinary coin and the hollow took every piece. The soil gave another inch and his hand sank with it. The 7 braided relief around his voice. I pulled him then. Some choices make themselves and call it love. His hand came free with a soft glove sound. We tumbled out beneath the fence and lay in the good dirt, panting and swearing and not saying the thing both of us knew. The count had moved closer to the number it wanted. He left before dawn broke the house into its parts. His note on my table said only, "It's finished." I called until I heard my own voice like a man down a hallway. I drove to my sister's. He'd gone to say goodbye to friends, she said, smiling with a mouth that did not believe itself. By midnight, the neighborhood had gathered its useful panic. A deputy took notes. Somebody prayed in the yard. We tried not to say missing. I drove to the cemetery because some stories make you choose whether you will be in them or only near them. The corner waited the way rooms wait after funerals. I knelt at the oval and pressed my palm to the light soil where his had gone. Warm, not with heat, but with attention. The ground knew I was there. 7th, the papery voice said, far away now, like someone speaking from a barn through closed slats. The word had changed. It wasn't a request. It was a bell rung to mark the end of a service. No, I said. It came out wrong, a word chewed by sleep. Names, said the man who kept the ledger, pleased. We have names. Say them, I told the dirt. And they did, not in a clean list, but in the fits and starts way. Rain chooses a roof, a farmhand, a tailor, a deputy, a widow, a boy who laughed, a woman whose hands could braid without pulling, and the 7th, spoken by the woman with such ferocity and love I felt my spine adjust to carry it. They said his name without my permission, the way a bell says a town without a map. You'll expect me to tell you the ground split and took him, and that I stood too late and found only his hat, or his shoe, or a sleeve to clutch at daylight. You'll expect a mark, a sign, a proof you can point at. We are greedy for clean stories. What I had was worse, quiet ground, a ticking fence, the memory of his hand coming free of the dirt like a pulled coin. What I had was a number that had stopped needing me. There was a second beat that first night. After Eli dozed, I walked the fence with my light off to prove the dark didn't own me. Every few steps the grass changed song, hiss, rasp, then nothing at all where nothing wanted to rub against it. Out past the corner, something scratched once and stopped the way a man does when he remembers his manners. I told myself it was a rabbit remembering a coyote. At breakfast, a waitress called us Han and kept our cups full. Eli paid with lawn money and looked 12 doing it. On the drive back, we didn't say voices, only that corner, as if naming a thing might sign a contract. In the store that smells like rubber and popcorn, he picked up a whistle in the camping aisle and set it back carefully, the way you return a bright promise you can't afford. The second night slid past talk into listening. Around midnight, when counting wears out, Eli said, "What if 7 isn't bodies? What if it's tellers?" The thought sat between us like a live coal. The story changed again. Dates moved, faces blurred, but the heat stayed the same. And at its edge, the woman voice swallowed a too large word. "I won't say his name," she said. "You can't have it." The ledger voice offered winter and calves and math that pretended to be courage. A younger voice laughed, then choked, and said he'd thought it was a game until the rope taught him the rule. We left early, and the road home was longer than it had any right to be. I lay awake thinking about 7s, a week, a scale, the things we call complete so we can stop touching them. By afternoon of the third day, I almost turned toward Palo Duro and made us honest with geology. But habit is a kind of faith. I took the Caliche road and felt the truck shudder like a body trying not to answer its name. We didn't light a fire that last night. Courtesy, not strategy. The voices braided soft and sure. I made my foolish offer. They declined me with pity. Eli opened his notebook like a clerk at a small town window and began to pay an ordinary coin. After moths and coffee and Branson's joke, he told them about the bus that smelled like vinyl and oranges, about the teacher who drew a smiley on a failed quiz because the margin made her laugh, about the fear that his father's leaving was not an event, but a talent he might secretly share, about the catch in his mother's laugh that made you want to hold it steady. He kept going until the ground nearly matched the temperature of his hand. When I dragged him back and the air took a long breath, relief didn't arrive. Something had been recently in the room and had not put the chair back under the table. At the truck, he pressed his hands to his eyes until stars printed there and said, "It's nothing." And we waited a long time for nothing to prove itself. He was gone by evening, leaving its finished on my kitchen table. The neighborhood gathered its useful panic. A deputy with a pad asked if he'd seemed troubled. Casseroles arrived as if carbs could absorb bad luck. I said the words that let people keep moving. Then I drove to the corner because stories make you choose being in them or near them. The bowl of pale soil looked like it always had. When I set my palm to it, the ground met me like a hand that's learned your name. Seventh, the papery voice said from far away. Not a request now, but a bell. Names, said the ledger man, pleased with his list. And I asked for them because language is the only tool I own. They came in a rain that couldn't make up its mind. A tailor with a stitched coin. A farmhand fooled by friendship. A deputy trying to keep things from getting worse. A widow whose forgiveness had curdled into something stronger than hate. The boy with the laugh. The woman with the careful hands. And the seventh, the name that carried my sister's face inside it. For a few weeks, people said they saw Eli at the gas station, at the skate park, on a bench outside the shuttered feed store. Grief makes duplicates. I chased two and found only haircuts. Once I took a lawn chair to the fence and sat with a thermos until dawn. The seven told and told. The details changing hats. The heat the same. I thought if I wrote it all down, the story might learn it was finished. I learned it already knew. If you go, no, the corner does not perform. Some nights it is only dirt, and you'll be angry at yourself for bringing your scared heart to a harmless place. Other nights the fence ticks like cooling stars, and the voices lay their braid over your own small thread. When you feel the gap inside their telling, the hole the size of a boy's name, do not think about symmetry. Think about how many stories we have ruined by trying to make them come out even. I tell my sister the finished count saved someone else somewhere. Maybe a rope stayed coiled, maybe a lie died in its mouth. That is a story she can sleep inside. Mine is shorter and it wakes me. In the hour between the refrigerator's hum and the house's settle, a dry whisper of a spiral notebook page turning itself somewhere between the stars and the dirt. 7 finishing and 1 that never will. I never thought cemeteries were scary places. Growing up in Lubbock, they were just another stretch of grass my Uncle Roy paid me to mow. At 16, I'd ride with him in his battered truck. The smell of gasoline mixing with cut Johnson grass and sun-warmed granite. Ghosts didn't bother me. Daylight was for men with string trimmers, sore backs, and a cooler of off-brand sodas. 20 years later, after a divorce and a streak of bad luck, I found myself back in town working with Barnes & Sons, contractors who took on whatever jobs no one else wanted. Patching county roads, fixing cattle guards, odd construction. In June, the county clerk called about expanding a little rural cemetery west of town. The church that owned it wanted an extra acre. 10 new graves dug and ready. Straight trenches, the clerk said like he was ordering fence posts. We hauled the excavator out one hot morning. Keeley, our foreman, looked carved out of rawhide. Polly, the youngest on the crew, lit up a smoke and asked if I believed in bad mojo. I told him I only believed in getting done before noon. The sun in West Texas doesn't forgive dawdling. We laid out the grid, chalk lines crisp across dry prairie soil. It was all routine until the bucket shuddered and the machine spat out rotten wood and splinters. I hopped down, thinking maybe we'd hit some old root cellar. But no, it was a grave half-dug decades ago, the clay walls raked with deep claw marks. Boards chewed through from the inside. Polly whistled. Somebody didn't go gentle. Keeley spat, muttered about old coffins caving in. But he didn't sound sure. He told us to clean it out, tarp it overnight, and he'd talk to the church the next day. By evening, the hole was covered with blue plastic, held down by sandbags. The tarp rose and fell like something breathing underneath. Polly laughed about it, but his eyes stayed glued to that ripple. We loaded up, ready to call it a day when the radio crackled. At first it was just static, then a voice muffled and weak. Hey, Mason, my name. My stomach dropped. Keeley killed the radio, muttering about interference. But I kept looking back at the cemetery, shrinking behind us, tarp shivering in the dusk. That night I woke to faint tapping. At first I thought it was the house settling. Then I realized it was coming from inside my closet. I lay there with sweat sticking my shirt to my back, staring at the door. The cheap two-way radio I'd brought home hissed once like a breath. I didn't sleep again until dawn. The next morning, Polly looked gray. Heard knocking all night, he said, like somebody trying to get out. Keeley just said, we finish. We moved the dirt, we tried, but the tarp shifted in the still air, lifting as if something pressed from beneath. When we pulled it back, we found a small wooden box nailed shut, with one faint word penciled across the lid. Please. Inside lay a tongueless bell, a crushed mouth organ, and a faded photo of a boy. Arthur, the back said. The pastor came that afternoon. Young, polite, but uneasy. He explained in the old days people tied strings from coffins to bells above ground, insurance against being buried alive. Sometimes graves were left half-finished. Sometimes, he said, a thing half done stays hungry for the rest. That night, Polly couldn't resist. He drove out with a lantern and a metal detector. Called me at 2 a.m., whispering, "You ever get a word stuck in your teeth?" "Mine's Arthur." "I gotta know." I found him by the west fence, lantern light dancing. The tarp had been dragged aside. In the pit, the string still hung from the clay wall, trembling. Polly grabbed it before I could stop him. It came out inch by inch, wet with earth. Then the ground gave way with a sigh. Something slid deeper. Polly staggered, nearly fell in. We ran for the truck. Behind us came the faint toll of a bell. Not the broken trinket, but a real, steady ringing from beneath the earth. 2 notes, patient as an old clock. The lantern blew out. When I turned, Polly was gone. By dawn, I sat hollow-eyed on the tailgate. Keeley arrived, looked into the pit, and shut his jaw tight. "We finished," he said again, though his voice cracked. The sheriff came later, took photos, promised ground radar. They never found Polly. The pastor prayed, asking the ground to give up what it couldn't keep. But when the wind lifted, it carried a voice through the fence wire. "Arthur." Then softer. "Please." I've kept the radio ever since. Some nights it crackles alive and I hear more than one voice now. Pleading, coaxing, reminding. It's dark. It's quiet. And lately, it's your turn. I haven't gone back to the pit, but I know it's waiting. The land remembers, and unfinished graves don't stay unfinished forever.